In the old stories of the American Southwest, the desert is not an empty wasteland. It is alive, a vast and breathing presence where the rocks and the winds seem to remember everything that has ever happened. At night, the mesas cast enormous shadows across the sand, and the horizon stretches so far that you feel you are standing at the edge of the world. The air is sharp and dry, carrying only the sound of coyotes, the rustle of tumbleweed, and sometimes a noise you cannot name. To step into this landscape is to step into a liminal place, a world between life and death where time feels suspended. Travelers speak of a strange silence that descends without warning, of the uncanny sense of being watched, of shapes moving just beyond the reach of firelight. It is in these places, on the borders of what is known and what is feared, that the most terrifying figure of Navajo legend is said to walk. They call it Yinaldlushi, the one who goes on all fours. Outsiders know it by a different name, the Skinwalker. For generations, the very mention of this being was enough to silence a room. Among the Navajo, to speak of it openly is dangerous. To tell its story without care is to draw its attention, and no one wants that. Yet the tales persist, whispered in hushed voices, carried across campfires, passed along highways, and woven into the fabric of the land itself. The Skinwalker is not just a creature of the night. It is a witch, a human who has crossed into forbidden territory, breaking the most sacred laws to gain powers that no one should possess. It is a figure that terrifies because it blurs the line between man and beast, between the natural and the unnatural, between healer and destroyer. And to understand it, one must walk carefully through layers of history, mythology, and lived experience. The first encounters do not come in books or museums. They come in stories told by people who swear they have seen something they cannot explain. A farmer driving home late at night notices a figure running alongside his truck, keeping pace even as he pushes the engine faster and faster. At first, it looks like a man, impossibly fast, its face half hidden by animal skin, its eyes burning with something inhuman. Then, with a lurch, the figure drops to all fours and moves like no human body ever could, vanishing into the night. A family hears scratching at their windows, footsteps on the roof, guttural laughter echoing outside their door, but when they open it, nothing is there. Tracks in the dirt appear in the shape of a wolf, then shift abruptly into the footprints of a barefoot man. These are the experiences that define the Skinwalker. They are always close, always watching, always just out of reach. The Navajo did not invent this creature for entertainment. It is not a Halloween ghost story or a cautionary tale told to children. It comes from the darkest part of their spiritual world, a part that is rarely spoken of. Among the Diné, witchcraft is not the same as magic. Healing, ceremony, and balance are part of the sacred way, Hojo, the state of harmony between people, nature, and the spirits. Witches, however, work against this balance. They are people who choose the path of destruction, who use sacred knowledge for selfish gain, who betray the community by twisting ritual into something unholy. And among these witches, none are more feared than the one who wears the skin of an animal. The name Yinaldlushi translates roughly to, with it, he goes on all fours. The phrase is not a description of a species. It is a title, a label given to someone who has crossed into forbidden power. A skinwalker is not born, it is made. To become one, a witch must perform acts so terrible that even speaking them aloud is taboo. They must break the ultimate taboo of the Navajo, the killing of a family member, often a sibling. This act of ultimate betrayal severs them from human ties and opens the door to a life of secrecy and power. Having crossed that boundary, the witch learns the art of transformation. By wearing the hide of an animal, wolf, coyote, bear, owl, they take on its shape, not merely in appearance, but in speed, strength, and perception. In the stories, they can run faster than a car, leap across mesas, or stalk their prey in total silence. But their power does not end with transformation. Skinwalkers are said to wield curses and powders made from the most profane of ingredients, bones and body parts of the dead. With these, they can sicken, torment, or kill. Victims waste away, plagued by nightmares, paranoia, and an unseen force that drains them of life. To see a skinwalker is to risk becoming its target, and to speak its name openly is to risk inviting its gaze. This is why many traditional Navajo people refuse to discuss them, especially with outsiders. The less attention drawn, the safer everyone remains. Despite this silence, the legend has never disappeared. In fact, it has grown stronger, carried into the wider world through stories of strange encounters, strange tracks, and stranger lands. One place in particular has become synonymous with skinwalker activity, a patch of land in Utah now infamous under a single name, Skinwalker Ranch. Here, cattle mutilations, glowing orbs, and terrifying apparitions have fueled decades of speculation, drawing investigators, scientists, and thrill seekers. Yet beneath the media frenzy lies the older truth. Long before the ranch, long before modern America, the figure of the skinwalker haunted the night. It was not a creature created by movies or tabloids. It was and remains the most feared witch in Navajo tradition. To begin to unmask this being, one must first understand the world from which it comes. The Navajo people, or Diné, have lived in the American Southwest for centuries, their stories woven into the mesas, canyons, and deserts. Their spiritual worldview is built on balance. Harmony is not just an idea, but a way of life, guiding relationships with family, with the community, and with the land. Healing ceremonies, chants, and rituals exist to restore balance when illness or misfortune strikes. But if there are ways to heal, there are also ways to harm. And those who choose harm become the witches, the antithesis of harmony. Among them, the skinwalker represents the extreme, the one who not only disrupts balance but weaponizes it. Accounts describe skinwalkers appearing at night outside hogans, peering through smoke holes, scratching at doors. Some say they whistle, an act considered a direct challenge. Others say they can mimic voices, calling out in the sound of a loved one to lure their victim outside. They are described as wearing animal hides, often of coyotes or wolves, which are taboo for traditional Navajo to wear. To see someone in such a skin at night is to know instantly what they are. Once transformed, they run with an unnatural gait, moving faster than the eye can follow, their bodies twisting into shapes that no normal bones should allow. Witnesses often describe the overwhelming sense of dread that accompanies an encounter, a primal knowledge that something inhuman is present. But to reduce the skinwalker to mere monster would miss its deeper role. It is not simply a predator, it is a warning, a boundary marker. It defines the line between what is sacred and what is profane. By embodying the violation of the deepest taboos, the skinwalker teaches the community what must never be done. In this way, its horror is not random. It is precise, designed to show the consequences of corruption and betrayal. To look at it is to confront the possibility of what a human being becomes when they abandon all ties to kinship, to morality, and to balance. It is humanity twisted into its darkest form, yet the fascination with the skinwalker does not remain confined to the Navajo. Outsiders, hearing fragments of the legend, have carried it into the realm of popular culture, where it has become both distorted and magnified. Horror films, novels, and internet forums spread images of a shape-shifting beast, half wolf, half human, chasing travelers on lonely highways. But these retellings often strip the being of its cultural context, turning it into just another monster in the long line of American folklore. The reality is far more complex. To the Diné, the skinwalker is not entertainment. It is lived fear, woven into ceremonies, whispered in moments of warning, and avoided in daily life. To understand why the legend persists, one must also understand the silence that surrounds it. Many Navajo will not discuss skinwalkers with outsiders, not because they doubt their existence, but because the act of speaking is itself dangerous. Words have power, and attention is a kind of invitation. By refusing to speak, by maintaining silence, they protect themselves and their families. This silence, however, has had another effect. It has given the legend an aura of mystery that only fuels outsiders' curiosity. What is not said becomes more compelling than what is explained. And so the skinwalker has become both a cultural boundary and a cultural export, a figure both deeply rooted in Navajo life and endlessly transformed by those beyond it. The night desert continues to hold its secrets. Travelers still report strange encounters. Families still tell stories of figures at the window, of animals that are not animals, of footsteps that stop suddenly in the dirt. The skinwalker remains what it has always been, a being that blurs the boundary between human and beast, healer and destroyer, myth and reality. To understand it fully, we must walk deeper into its story, into the forbidden rituals that create it, the powers it wields, and the role it plays in defining the limits of what it means to be human. The desert silence is never truly empty. To those who live close to the land, it carries messages, the kind of signs most travelers overlook: the direction of the wind, the sound of coyotes at a distance, the way shadows move across stone. For the Navajo, these are not meaningless details. They are part of a language spoken by the land itself, one that guides, warns, and protects. Yet within this language, there are moments that break all patterns, unnatural silences, movements that defy explanation, footsteps where no person should be. It is in these breaks that the first stories of the skinwalker take shape. They are not tales told for amusement. They are warnings rooted in lived experience, stories that describe encounters too vivid and too terrifying to dismiss. One of the earliest and most common accounts begins with the simple act of traveling at night. The Southwest has long stretches of road that cut across open desert, where the only light comes from the stars and the faint glow of distant settlements. Drivers describe the unease that creeps in when the headlights catch movement along the roadside. At first, it looks like an animal, a coyote or a dog, but then it stands upright, a figure lean and ragged keeping pace with the car as though running were effortless. The face is wrong, stretched, twisted, almost human but not entirely. Some witnesses say the creature locks eyes with them, and in that instant they feel a jolt of dread so sharp it feels like a physical blow. When the driver speeds up, the figure follows, its movements jerking between human and animal, until finally it veers into the darkness, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. Stories like these echo again and again. Families in remote hogans speak of footsteps circling their homes long after midnight. Sometimes the sound is accompanied by scratching at the door or tapping on windows. When the bravest among them step outside to confront the intruder, they find tracks in the dirt. At first, the prints resemble those of a wolf or a coyote, but after a few steps, they shift abruptly into the unmistakable shape of human feet. In some cases, the tracks lead away from the home before simply stopping, as though the creature had vanished into thin air. It is these details, the sudden changes, the incomprehensible disappearances, that make skinwalker stories unlike other tales of predators. They are not simply about danger, they are about violation, about the collapse of boundaries between what should be and what should never exist. Among the Navajo, some of the most chilling stories involve the skinwalker's ability to mimic human voices. Families describe hearing their names called from outside in the middle of the night. At first, the sound is familiar, a father's voice, a sister's, a child's. But something is off. The cadence is wrong. The tone is flat, almost mocking, as though the speaker is imitating rather than speaking. To respond is considered a grave mistake, for it acknowledges the creature's presence and gives it power. Survivors say the only safe response is silence, waiting until the false voice fades into the night. These accounts highlight why the Skinwalker is feared not just as a physical threat, but as a master of psychological terror, a being that uses familiarity itself as a weapon. Some encounters are not limited to sound or sight, but involve direct confrontation. Ranchers tell of livestock found mutilated in ways that no predator could accomplish. Animals discovered with organs removed, bodies drained of blood, or left untouched except for a single wound. These discoveries fuel speculation, but to the Navajo, they fit a larger pattern. Skinwalkers are said to target the vulnerable, the dependent, the ones under human care. By attacking animals, they attack the livelihood of families, spreading fear and despair. The violence is not random but ritualistic, a demonstration of power meant to unnerve as much as to harm. One account, passed through generations, tells of a man walking home under the light of the moon. He noticed a large coyote following him at a distance. Each time he turned, it stopped, watching with eyes that seemed far too intelligent. Finally, the man grew angry and shot at it with his rifle. The animal yelped and stumbled, but when he approached the fallen body, he found not a coyote, but a man, wounded in the leg. By morning, the story had spread through the community, and whispers confirmed what everyone feared. The man had wounded a Skinwalker. Such stories serve not only as warnings, but as explanations for misfortunes or strange injuries. When someone suspected of witchcraft appeared with a wound at the same time an animal had been shot, the connection was obvious. The witch had been caught in its other form. Other stories focus on the Skinwalker's uncanny speed and strength. People describe figures running alongside vehicles traveling at 50 or 60 miles per hour, leaping across fences or scaling cliffs with inhuman agility. These are not the actions of an ordinary witch or animal. They are demonstrations of a body reshaped by forbidden power. Witnesses emphasize the unnaturalness of the movements, jerky, contorted, as though the body itself resists the form it has been forced to take. This distortion is part of the terror. The Skinwalker is never fully animal nor fully human. It is caught in between, its very existence an offense to the natural order. One of the most unsettling elements in these stories is the sense of being watched long before any figure appears. People describe a heaviness in the air, an overwhelming dread that settles over them even before the encounter begins. Dogs growl at empty doorways. Horses refuse to move forward, staring at nothing with wide, fearful eyes. Then, only after the tension has reached its breaking point, does the figure reveal itself. This pattern suggests that the Skinwalker is not merely a physical threat, but an intentional manipulator of fear. It wants to be seen, but only at the moment when terror is strongest. In this way, the encounter is not just a chance meeting, it is a ritual, a deliberate act of domination. In some stories, those who confront the Skinwalker directly attempt to fight back. Bullets and blades are said to have little effect unless aimed at vital points, and even then, survival is uncertain. Traditional belief holds that the only true way to kill a Skinwalker is to know its human identity and call it by name. Once unmasked, its power collapses, and it can be destroyed. This detail reveals another layer of the legend. The Skinwalker is not an external monster, but a member of the community, someone who has chosen the path of witchcraft. Every encounter carries the suspicion that the figure in the night could be a neighbor, a relative, or someone known by face if not by name. This transforms fear from something distant into something intimate. It is not the stranger in the dark who is most dangerous. It is the familiar face that hides a secret life. When outsiders first heard these stories, they often dismissed them as superstition or exaggerated folklore. But to those within the community, they are neither entertainment nor metaphor. They are records of encounters, descriptions of events that cannot be ignored. The persistence of these stories across decades and generations speaks to their weight. They survive because they describe experiences that continue to happen, experiences that leave scars not just on individuals, but on entire families and communities. The earliest recorded accounts from non-Navajo sources began appearing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often in the writings of anthropologists or travelers who had gained the trust of their hosts. These records are careful, often restrained, emphasizing how difficult it was to obtain information. Many informants refused to speak at all, while others shared only fragments. What emerges from these early accounts is a picture of silence punctuated by sudden moments of revelation, stories offered in whispers, often accompanied by warnings not to repeat them. The reluctance itself testifies to the depth of the fear. To speak of the Skinwalker is to risk its attention, and no one wants that burden. Over time, these stories have spread beyond the boundaries of Navajo land. Highway patrol officers, truck drivers, and campers in the Southwest report encounters that mirror traditional accounts. The details differ, but the patterns remain the same. Unnatural speed, shifting forms, the overwhelming dread. These modern sightings suggest that the legend has extended into a broader cultural consciousness, becoming part of the larger landscape of American folklore. Yet without the cultural framework of the Navajo, these retellings often miss the depth of meaning. They present the Skinwalker as a cryptid, a mysterious beast roaming the desert, rather than what it truly represents, the ultimate violation of sacred law, the embodiment of human corruption. The power of these stories lies in their consistency. Whether told by elders around the fire or by drivers on lonely highways, they carry the same core elements: transformation, mimicry, unnatural movement, and dread. They describe not just encounters with a predator, but confrontations with something fundamentally wrong. And each story reinforces the same truth: the Skinwalker is not just seen, it is experienced, felt in the body, in the sudden chill of the night air, in the pounding of the heart, in the certainty that something impossible has entered the world. These first encounters are only the beginning. To understand why the Skinwalker is feared above all others, we must look beyond the stories themselves to the forbidden practices that create it. What drives a person to break the deepest taboos of their people? What rituals transform a healer into a destroyer, a human into a creature of terror? To unmask the Skinwalker fully, we must step into the world of Navajo witchcraft itself, a world that is rarely spoken of, where every secret carries a cost. The figure that runs alongside a car or scratches at the door is terrifying enough, but it is the transformation that defines the Skinwalker. At its heart, the legend is about the violation of form, the collapse of the line between human and animal. In a world where balance is sacred, where each being has its place and purpose, the Skinwalker disrupts everything by becoming something it should never be. It is not simply a witch wearing an animal's hide as a disguise. It is a human body warped and bent into something that no longer belongs to either world. This is why the stories linger so deeply in the imagination. To witness a Skinwalker is to see a person reduced to raw hunger and predation, their humanity stripped away, leaving only the mask of the beast. The hides are central to the transformation. In Navajo culture, wearing the skin of most animals is considered taboo, especially predators such as coyotes, wolves, and bears. These animals are powerful and dangerous, associated with forces that must be respected rather than imitated. To wear their skin is to blur the boundary between human and animal, and to do so at night is an unmistakable sign of witchcraft. Traditional stories describe skinwalkers donning the hides of these creatures to assume their shapes, moving as coyotes, wolves, owls, or even larger beasts. The hide is not simply clothing, it is the key that unlocks the forbidden ability. Once worn, the witch is no longer merely human. They take on the animal's attributes, gaining its speed, strength, and senses, but retaining the cunning of their human mind. Witnesses often describe the result as grotesque. The transformed figure does not move naturally, as though the human body resists the animal form it has been forced to adopt. Coyotes loping on hind legs, wolves with two human eyes, owls that seem to mimic the sound of human laughter. Each sight is a disruption of the natural order, a living contradiction. The horror lies not only in the physical form but in the uncanny familiarity. The creature is both known and unknown, recognizable yet impossible. This is why so many stories emphasize the dread that comes before the sighting. The fear is not just of an animal or a person, but of something caught between, a presence that should not exist at all. Some accounts suggest that the hides themselves are prepared through rituals of corruption. Unlike ceremonial garments or sacred masks used in healing practices, these skins are defiled, soaked in blood, and bound with chants twisted from sacred songs. The witch imbues them with power, linking their own life force to the animal spirit they are desecrating. In this way, the transformation is not only physical, but spiritual. The skinwalker is not wearing a costume. They are fusing themselves with the animal, forcing a union that is violent, unnatural, and enduring. To see one in its hide is to see a person who has surrendered their humanity in exchange for predatory power. The choice of animal is not random. Coyotes are most commonly mentioned, perhaps because they are the tricksters of the desert, creatures associated with deception and survival. Wolves are feared for their strength and cunning, while bears embody brute force. Owls, in many native traditions, are messengers of death, their presence a sign of mortality. When a skinwalker takes the form of an owl, it is not just a predator, but a harbinger, a creature that signals death is near. In every case, the animal chosen reflects the darkness the witch wishes to channel, amplifying their ability to stalk, terrify, and kill. The horror of shape-shifting is not limited to the body of the witch. It extends outward, warping the environment itself. People describe animals acting strangely in the presence of a skinwalker. Dogs whimpering, cattle refusing to move, horses bucking at invisible threats. The transformed witch does not merely change themselves. They disturb the balance of everything around them. This is why encounters are often marked not only by fear, but by a kind of sickness. Witnesses describe nausea, dizziness, or sudden weakness in their limbs. Some interpret this as the psychological shock of the encounter. Others believe it is a deliberate effect, the skinwalker projecting its corruption outward to weaken those who see it. In traditional belief, one of the most dangerous powers of the skinwalker is the ability to take the form of someone familiar. Not only can they appear as animals, but they can also imitate friends, relatives, or neighbors. This power of disguise makes them nearly impossible to detect. A voice outside at night calling your name, the shape of a loved one seen at the edge of the firelight. These are not coincidences, but deliberate deceptions meant to lure victims into vulnerability. The terror lies in the fact that the enemy is not a stranger, but could be anyone, hidden beneath the skin of the familiar. This ability to cross boundaries, human to animal, stranger to kin, makes the skinwalker a figure of profound disruption. They embody the collapse of trust, the violation of identity. In a community where survival depends on cooperation, on knowing who can be relied upon, the idea of someone who can become anyone else is devastating. It creates an atmosphere of suspicion and fear, where even the closest relationships can be questioned. In this way, the skinwalker is not only a supernatural threat, but a social one, undermining the very fabric of community. The violence associated with their transformations is equally unsettling. Stories tell of skinwalkers using their animal forms to stalk prey across the desert, running on all fours with impossible speed. Some describe them leaping onto rooftops, scratching at doors, or even attempting to break through walls. The sheer physicality of the accounts emphasizes their unnatural power. They are not bound by human limits. Their bodies are weapons, twisted into forms that defy explanation. Witnesses often describe the sound of bones cracking or joints popping as the transformation takes place, as though the body itself is breaking apart to accommodate its new shape. This detail, whether literal or symbolic, underscores the horror. To become a skinwalker is not graceful, it is violent, grotesque, and painful. The hide itself carries danger even when not worn. In some accounts, people who find or touch such skins without permission become cursed, falling ill, or suffering misfortune. This suggests that the power of the skinwalker is not limited to their body, but extends to the objects they use. The hide becomes a vessel of corruption infused with the witch's power and malice. This is why the mere sight of someone wearing such a skin is enough to confirm their identity. No ordinary person would dare handle such a thing, let alone wear it. Anthropologists who studied Navajo culture in the early 20th century often struggled to capture the essence of these beliefs. To them, the idea of transformation seemed like superstition, a symbolic expression of fear. But within the community, it is understood as a reality, one that must be respected regardless of interpretation. The refusal to wear predator hides, the warnings against traveling alone at night, the silence surrounding witchcraft, all of these practices reinforce the seriousness of the skinwalker's threat. They are not curiosities, but survival strategies, ways of maintaining safety in a world where such beings might still exist. The legend of the skinwalker has also influenced how outsiders perceive the broader idea of shape-shifting. In European traditions, werewolves dominate the imagination, men cursed to transform under the full moon. But the skinwalker is older, more deliberate. It is not a victim of a curse, but a person who has chosen the path of transformation through deliberate acts of evil. This difference is crucial. The werewolf is tragic, a human undone by forces beyond their control. The skinwalker is monstrous by choice, an individual who has embraced horror to gain power. This makes them far more terrifying, for they represent not fate, but corruption. What makes the horror of the skinwalker linger is its intimacy. It is not an alien monster or a distant beast. It is a person, someone who once belonged, who made a choice to betray everything sacred. The hides they wear are not costumes but declarations, proof that they have abandoned humanity to become something else. Every time a coyote runs too close, every time an owl calls outside a home, the possibility exists that it is not an animal at all, but a witch wearing its skin. This uncertainty ensures that the legend remains alive, woven into every sound of the night, every shadow cast by the desert moon. The horror of transformation, the grotesque mimicry of animal and human forms, and the betrayal of community are all bound together in the figure of the skinwalker. But transformation is only one part of their power. To fully understand the fear they inspire, one must look at what they do beyond shape-shifting, the curses, the rituals, the manipulation of life and death itself. The hides are the doorway, but the true terror lies in the practices that sustain them, the forbidden knowledge that turns a person into something far worse than a predator. The question of how a person becomes a skinwalker is not just a matter of whispered folklore. It is bound to a history that is far darker and more complex, one that reaches into the most secret and forbidden aspects of Navajo life. Witchcraft, in its many forms, has always been the shadow side of sacred practice. Just as ceremonies exist to heal and restore balance, other rituals exist to harm, to disrupt, to twist that same power towards selfish or destructive ends. Within Navajo tradition, those who follow this path are not merely outcasts. They are considered the most dangerous kind of enemy, for they turn the very knowledge meant to protect the people into a weapon against them. And among these figures, the skinwalker is the most feared. the existence of witchcraft is never spoken of lightly. Even today, many Navajo refuse to discuss it at all, believing that words themselves draw attention. Yet the belief has always been there, and with it, the need to confront it. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, this confrontation sometimes took the form of what could only be described as witchcraft trials. These were not trials in the European sense, staged in courts with judges and official records. They were community reckonings, moments when suspicion reached a breaking point, when misfortune demanded an explanation, and when someone was accused of walking the forbidden path. The records that survive, written mostly by outsiders such as anthropologists, traders, or missionaries, describe these moments with a mixture of fascination and alarm. To them, the idea of witchcraft trials among the Navajo seemed an echo of Europe's own dark history, yet the context was profoundly different. These were not mass hunts or hysteria, they were targeted responses to specific events, illness that spread without cause, livestock dying in unusual numbers, or sightings of figures in animal skins near the edges of settlements. When no natural explanation could be found, suspicion turned toward those believed to be practicing witchcraft. Accusations were never made casually. To call someone a witch was to risk unleashing fear and violence. Yet, when the weight of evidence or rumor became too strong, the community sometimes acted. Men suspected of witchcraft might be confronted, their homes searched for skins, powders, or bones, the tools believed to mark a skinwalker. If such items were found, the proof was considered undeniable. Punishments varied. Some accused witches were banished, others killed, their bodies burned to prevent them from returning. Outsiders often recoiled at these stories, but within Navajo society, the logic was clear. Witchcraft was not just a crime, it was a threat to the very survival of the people. The forbidden path to becoming a skinwalker begins with acts of corruption so profound that they sever the individual from all ties of kinship and morality. One of the most often cited taboos is fratricide, the killing of a sibling. This act of betrayal is considered the ultimate break with harmony, a tearing of the sacred bonds of family. By committing such a crime, the would-be witch opens themselves to power, but it is a power purchased at the cost of their humanity. From that point on, they belong to the shadow world, sustained by secrecy, fear, and ritual. What follows is initiation into practices that pervert the sacred songs and ceremonies of the Navajo. Every chant, every ritual has its opposite. Just as there are prayers for healing, there are curses for harm. Just as sand paintings can restore balance, they can also be used to cause illness. The witch learns these inversions, bending what was once sacred into something destructive. The skinwalker takes this a step further by adding transformation, by using hides to cross the boundary between human and animal. This makes them not just a witch, but something entirely other, a figure who lives at the intersection of worlds. The trials, when they occurred, were attempts to root out these figures and restore safety to the community. Yet they were never simple. Accusations often carried personal motives, grudges, rivalries, or unresolved tensions. Outsiders noted that fear of witchcraft sometimes erupted during times of stress, such as during epidemics or after raids, when people searched for explanations. In these moments, suspicion could fall on anyone who lived at the margins, anyone whose behavior seemed strange, or anyone who had been seen wearing animal skins. Yet beneath these tensions was always the same fear, that someone close, someone trusted, had chosen the forbidden path. Accounts describe entire villages gathering for meetings where accusations were made. The accused might be questioned, pressured to confess, or tested. Some stories tell of suspected witches being forced to undergo ceremonies meant to reveal their guilt, where their reactions to certain chants or sacred objects betrayed their true nature. Others were caught when their wounds matched injuries inflicted on an animal thought to be a skinwalker. In each case, the process was less about legal proof than about restoring balance. If a witch was found, the community believed it had no choice but to act. The presence of these trials reveals how deeply the Skinwalker legend is tied to lived reality. This was not folklore told only in stories, but a belief system that shaped how people responded to misfortune, sickness, and fear. To the Navajo, witchcraft was not a distant superstition. It was a real and present danger, one that required vigilance. The Skinwalker, as the most feared form of witch, represented the extreme, the figure who embodied everything that could go wrong when sacred power was corrupted. Outsiders looking in often misunderstood. They compared Navajo witchcraft trials to the Salem witch trials, interpreting them as irrational outbursts of fear. But the comparison is misleading. Salem was marked by mass hysteria, where dozens were accused and executed in a frenzy of religious paranoia. Navajo trials were more contained, often involving only a handful of individuals. They were not aimed at eliminating entire groups, but at confronting specific threats. And unlike Salem, where accusations were often based on visions or hearsay, Navajo accusations often rested on concrete signs, the discovery of hides, powders, or bones hidden in the accused person's possession. What stands out in these accounts is the seriousness with which witchcraft was treated. It was not dismissed as fantasy. It was considered one of the greatest dangers a community could face, capable of destroying families, spreading illness, and undermining harmony. This seriousness is what gave rise to the fear of skinwalkers in particular. They were not simply another kind of witch. They were the ones who had gone furthest, who had embraced the forbidden path so completely that they had ceased to be human. The forbidden path is not only about ritual and transformation, it is about choice. To become a skinwalker is to choose corruption, to abandon family, community, and balance in favor of power. This choice is what makes them so terrifying. Unlike monsters born from myth, they are not outside humanity. They are born from within it, from people who once shared the same ceremonies and stories, who made the decision to cross a line no one else dared to approach. This betrayal is why the Skinwalker legend resonates so strongly. It is not only a story about predators in the night, it is a story about trust broken from the inside, about the danger that comes not from strangers, but from those who were once closest. The fear of this path lingers even today. Among the Navajo, the word itself is avoided, conversations about witchcraft are cut short, and stories are told only in whispers. The silence is not ignorance, it is protection. For to speak too openly is to risk drawing attention, to risk awakening forces better left undisturbed. Yet the stories survive, passed quietly through families, repeated in moments when warning is necessary. They remind each new generation of the dangers of the forbidden path, of the cost of betraying balance, and of the horror of those who choose to do so. Understanding the trials and the forbidden path illuminates why the Skinwalker is more than just another figure of folklore. They are the ultimate cautionary tale, the embodiment of what happens when sacred power is twisted beyond recognition. They are proof that the line between healer and destroyer is thin, and that stepping across it can transform a person into something unrecognizable. To unmask them is to confront the darkest part of humanity itself, the part willing to sacrifice kinship, balance, and morality for power. Yet, transformation and ritual are only part of their story. The Skinwalker is feared not only for what they are, but for what they can do. The next step in understanding them lies in the powers they wield once they have chosen this path. The speed, the strength, the curses, and the terror they spread across the desert night. The idea that someone can transform into a skinwalker raises the question that outsiders have always asked, but that Navajo voices often hesitate to answer. How does one become such a thing? The stories are consistent. No one is born a skinwalker. They are made. They are the result of choices, of rituals, of betrayal so severe that the person who commits them severs themselves forever from humanity. In Navajo thought, all life rests on balance. To walk in harmony is to live rightly, to keep oneself aligned with community, land, and the spirits. To become a skinwalker is to shatter that balance deliberately. It is to walk in the opposite direction, to embrace disharmony as a way of life. At the heart of this transformation lies a crime so severe that it cannot be undone. The most frequently spoken of is fratricide, the killing of a close family member, often a brother or sister. Among the Diné, family is the core of existence. To betray that bond is to sever oneself from the very foundation of balance. It is a rejection of kinship, of obligation, of the ties that make a person human. By committing this act, the would-be witch announces that nothing is sacred, that they will violate the deepest law for the sake of power. In some tellings, this killing is not only an act of betrayal, but part of the initiation itself. It is the price demanded for entry into the path of witchcraft, proof that the initiate is willing to forsake everything for the strength they desire. This is not the only requirement. To become a skinwalker, one must also learn the rituals of inversion, the twisting of sacred ceremonies into their opposites. Just as a healing chant can restore life, its inverse can curse or destroy. The witch learns these inverted forms, taking what was meant for balance and turning it into a weapon. In some cases, the initiate must participate in ceremonies of desecration, defiling sacred objects, using human remains in their rituals, consuming substances considered taboo. Anthropologists who studied these practices often heard only fragments, for those who knew refused to speak in detail. Yet the fragments paint a clear picture. To cross the line is to embrace corruption fully, to prove through action that the initiate is no longer bound by ordinary morality. The use of human remains is a recurring theme. Skinwalkers are said to craft powders from ground bones, particularly from the corpses of infants or children, which are considered especially powerful. These powders are blown into the faces of victims, causing sickness, wasting, or death. The very act of handling such remains is a violation of the deepest taboos. Among the Diné, the dead are to be respected and avoided. Death carries with it spiritual danger, a presence that lingers. To disturb the dead is to invite corruption. For the skinwalker, this corruption is the point. By desecrating the dead, they harness the power of decay itself, turning it into a weapon. Animal hides play another role in this process. The initiate must claim a skin, usually from a predator such as a coyote, wolf, or bear. But it is not enough to simply take the hide. It must be prepared, treated with chants and substances that bind it to the witch. Once completed, the hide becomes the gateway to transformation. The act of wearing it is not casual, it is a declaration. To put on the hide is to embrace the animal's essence, to merge with it in a way that corrupts both human and animal. The skin becomes not just clothing but a vessel of power, a symbol of the witch's new identity. The process of becoming a skinwalker is not a single moment but a progression. It begins with betrayal, continues with desecration, and culminates in transformation. Each step is a rejection of balance, a movement deeper into corruption. By the time the transformation is complete, the person has severed every tie to humanity. They are no longer bound by kinship, no longer guided by harmony. They live only for themselves, sustained by secrecy, fear, and power. One of the most disturbing aspects of the legend is that skinwalkers are not outsiders. They are members of the community who have chosen this path. They are people who once participated in the same ceremonies, who once lived by the same values, but who have decided to betray them. This is what makes them so terrifying. The enemy is not some distant monster, but someone who might live nearby, who might be seen in daylight as an ordinary person, but who at night becomes something else entirely. This duality, the ordinary faced by day, the predator by night, is central to the fear. It means that anyone could be a skinwalker, a neighbor, a relative, even a healer. The suspicion lingers, fed by secrecy and silence. If someone falls ill without explanation, if livestock die in strange ways, if shadows move at the edge of camp, people wonder who might be responsible. The legend thrives in this uncertainty, in the knowledge that the skinwalker is not marked by any obvious sign, that their true nature is hidden until it is too late. Outsiders often ask why anyone would choose such a path. The answer lies in power. To become a skinwalker is to gain abilities that ordinary people cannot match. Transformation into animals, unnatural speed and strength, the ability to curse and kill from a distance. These are the rewards of the forbidden path. For those who crave dominance, who desire revenge, or who seek freedom from the constraints of community, the temptation is real, but the cost is absolute. Once the line is crossed, there is no going back. The skinwalker is forever bound to the path of corruption. The initiation into witchcraft is not only personal, but communal. Some stories describe groups of witches gathering in secret, teaching one another the forbidden arts, sharing rituals and knowledge. These gatherings are said to take place in remote places, caves, mesas, or abandoned hogans, far from the eyes of the community. Here, initiates learn the full range of practices, from transformation to curses to rituals of desecration. Some accounts speak of skinwalkers gathering in groups, performing ceremonies that mock and invert sacred rituals, strengthening their power through collective corruption. These gatherings are the dark mirror of the ceremonies that sustain balance, reinforcing the inversion that defines the forbidden path. The fear of these gatherings is one reason why many Navajo avoid traveling alone at night or entering certain places. To stumble upon such a meeting is to risk death, for skinwalkers guard their secrecy fiercely. They cannot allow outsiders to witness their practices, and those who do are unlikely to survive. This secrecy ensures that details about their initiation remain vague, pieced together only from fragments of stories and the warnings of elders. Yet the vagueness itself is part of the power. What is not said is often more terrifying than what is described. Anthropologists and historians who attempted to document these practices often found themselves frustrated. Informants would share only partial accounts, stopping suddenly or refusing to elaborate when questions grew too direct. Some even warned the researchers to abandon their work, saying that to pry too deeply was to invite danger. A few claimed that outsiders who pursued knowledge of skinwalkers too aggressively risked becoming targets themselves. Whether literal or symbolic, the warning was clear. This knowledge is not meant to be handled lightly. The forbidden path is not unique to Navajo culture. Across the world, many traditions speak of figures who gain power through betrayal, desecration, or violation of sacred laws. European witches were said to renounce God and swear allegiance to the devil. In some African traditions, sorcerers gained power by consuming human flesh. In Polynesian cultures, taboos surrounded the misuse of sacred chants and names. The skinwalker fits into this global pattern, yet with distinct Navajo features. Their transformation through hides, their reliance on inversion, and their status as the most feared of all witches make them unique. Understanding how one becomes a skinwalker explains why they inspire such dread. They are not accidents of fate or victims of curses. They are people who have chosen corruption, who have embraced betrayal and desecration to gain power. This choice is what makes them monstrous. They are not simply predators. They are humans who have abandoned every bond of kinship and morality, who have crossed the line that separates the living from the dead, the sacred from the profane. Yet the story does not end with the act of becoming. Once the transformation is complete, the skinwalker gains powers that place them beyond ordinary danger. To understand why the desert night is feared, why people speak of figures running faster than cars, why voices call from outside in tones that are almost human, one must explore the abilities granted to those who have taken the forbidden path. Once the forbidden line has been crossed, the person who becomes a skinwalker is no longer bound by the same limits as ordinary men and women. It is not just the ability to wear a hide and shift into an animal that terrifies those who speak of them. It is what comes after, the powers that make them more than human, the abilities that allow them to strike fear into whole families and communities, to become a presence that cannot be fought in ordinary ways. The skinwalker is not feared only because it can change shape. It is feared because of what it can do once the transformation is complete. The most frequently described ability is speed. Stories from across Navajo country and far beyond speak of figures running alongside cars moving at 50, 60, even 70 miles an hour. Drivers tell of glancing out the window at night to see a shape keeping pace, its limbs moving in ways no human body should be able to. Sometimes it runs on 2 legs, sometimes it drops to 4, its gait loping, jerking, unnatural. The sight is always accompanied by the same sensation, dread so overwhelming that the witnesses cannot breathe, a primal certainty that something not of this world is just outside the glass. In some accounts, the figure taps on the window or even scratches the door as though toying with its prey. No one has ever outrun such a thing. At best, it vanishes into the darkness as suddenly as it appeared, leaving only the pounding of the heart and the certainty that the encounter was real. This speed is not limited to open roads. Skinwalkers are said to move with equal swiftness across the desert, leaping over fences, scaling cliffs, or racing across mesas with a grace that no human could match. Families describe hearing footsteps circling their hogans so fast that they seem to come from every direction at once. Hunters tell of chasing what looked like an animal only to find it gone, the tracks ending abruptly as though it had taken flight. This ability to appear and disappear, to cover impossible distances in moments, makes the skinwalker an ever-present threat. It can be anywhere, anytime, without warning. Strength is another defining trait. In the stories, skinwalkers are not limited by the fragility of the human body. They are said to tear through doors, to lift animals with ease, to leap onto rooftops in a single bound. Some accounts describe them attacking livestock, dragging sheep or calves away without struggle, leaving only scattered remains in the dirt. Others speak of skinwalkers confronting humans directly, overpowering them with blows that no ordinary person could deliver. This strength is not always physical in the usual sense. Witnesses describe being struck by an unseen force, knocked to the ground without contact, as though the very air had turned against them. Whether through brute power or some other manipulation, the result is the same. The victim is left helpless, unable to fight back against a being that is more than human. The terror inspired by these abilities goes beyond physical threat. Skinwalkers are masters of psychological warfare. One of their most unsettling powers is mimicry. They can reproduce the voices of loved ones, calling out from the darkness in tones that are almost but not quite right. A brother's voice calling from outside at night, a child's cry from the edge of the woods, a friend's laugh carried on the wind. These are not accidents. They are deliberate lures designed to draw victims into vulnerability. Those who respond risk being trapped, for to acknowledge the false voice is to give the skinwalker power. This is why many Navajo refuse to answer when their name is called at night. To do so might not be to answer a friend, but to fall into the trap of something waiting just beyond the firelight. Alongside mimicry is the power of illusion. Stories describe skinwalkers appearing as ordinary animals, but larger, faster, or stranger than they should be. A wolf with eyes that gleam too brightly, a coyote that moves in jerks and starts, an owl that seems to laugh. These are signs that what is being seen is not an animal at all. Some accounts go further, speaking of skinwalkers appearing as people, disguised as neighbors or relatives, walking in daylight with ordinary faces. This possibility feeds suspicion and paranoia. If anyone can be a skinwalker, then trust becomes fragile. Every shadow, every glance, carries the possibility of deception. Beyond speed, strength, and mimicry lies the most feared ability of all, the power to curse. Skinwalkers are said to wield powders made from bones, particularly from human remains, which they use to cause sickness or death. Victims waste away plagued by nightmares, hallucinations, or sudden illness with no clear cause. The curse is not always immediate. Sometimes it lingers, spreading slowly until the victim is reduced to weakness and despair. Healers can attempt to counter such curses through ceremonies, but the process is dangerous and uncertain. The very possibility of such power gives skinwalkers an aura of invincibility. They do not need to attack directly. They can destroy from a distance, leaving no trace of their hand. The fear of these curses is compounded by the belief that skinwalkers can influence dreams. People describe being tormented by visions of animals at night, only to fall ill soon after. Others say they hear voices whispering in their sleep, filling their minds with dread. Whether literal or symbolic, the effect is the same. The victim is stripped of rest, left vulnerable to both physical and spiritual attack. Sleep, the one refuge from fear, becomes another battlefield. Animals are often the first to sense a skinwalker's presence. Dogs growl at empty spaces, their fur rising as though something unseen is near. Horses refuse to move, eyes wide with terror. Livestock scatter for no reason, their cries carrying into the night. This sensitivity reinforces the belief that the skinwalker operates not only in the physical world, but in a spiritual one that animals can perceive more clearly than humans. When the animals are restless, when the night feels heavy and wrong, people know to be wary. Something may be near, watching, waiting. The terror is not only in what the skinwalker does, but in what it represents. Its powers are not random tricks, but deliberate violations of order, speed that no human should possess, strength that defies the body, mimicry that twists the voices of loved ones. Each ability is a corruption of what should be. They are not simply powers. They are reminders that the skinwalker has abandoned all balance, all kinship, all humanity. Every display of ability is a declaration of that betrayal. Some stories tell of ways to fight back, though always with risk. Bullets and blades are said to harm skinwalkers only if they strike true at vital points, and even then, survival is uncertain. Others say that the only true way to defeat one is to know its human identity and call it by name. Once unmasked, the skinwalker loses its power, forced back into the vulnerability of ordinary flesh. This is why secrecy is so important. A skinwalker must never be revealed, for its safety depends on remaining hidden. To know its name is to hold its life in your hands. But uncovering that name is nearly impossible, for the skinwalker moves carefully, always guarding its identity, always ready to strike at those who come too close. The combination of speed, strength, mimicry, and curses ensures that the skinwalker is not merely a predator, but a force of terror. It is a being that cannot be fought with ordinary weapons, one that uses fear as much as force, one that thrives on uncertainty. Every story of footsteps in the night, every account of voices calling from the darkness, every report of figures running alongside cars reinforces this truth. The skinwalker is not simply seen, it is experienced, felt in the body, in the rush of fear, in the certainty that something impossible is near. These powers also explain why the skinwalker is remembered not only as a figure of folklore, but as a lived danger. Families have guarded their homes, avoided certain places, or refused to speak of what they saw, all in an effort to protect themselves from the attention of such beings. Communities have confronted those suspected of walking this path, not because they doubted the legend, but because they believed in its reality. The Skinwalker is not a creature of distant myth. It is a presence that continues to shape behavior, to inspire silence, and to command fear. Yet the Skinwalker's powers are not unlimited. They depend on secrecy, on fear, on the corruption of sacred knowledge. To understand why they inspire such dread, one must also look at the tools they carry, the objects that sustain their power, and the rituals that keep them bound to the forbidden path. The hides, the powders, the bones, these are not merely props. They are extensions of the Skinwalker's power, the means by which it continues to terrify and control. The powers of the Skinwalker do not exist in isolation. They are tied to objects, substances, and rituals that give them shape and force. Just as a healer relies on sacred songs, herbs, and sand paintings to restore balance, the witch relies on tools that invert those practices, bending them toward corruption. These objects are not casual possessions, they are symbols of betrayal, tokens of the forbidden path, and each one carries its own aura of danger. To find such an item in someone's possession is enough to brand them a witch, enough to convince a community that they have crossed into territory no ordinary person should ever tread. The most recognizable of these tools is the animal hide. To outsiders, the idea may seem simple, a witch wearing the skin of a coyote or wolf, but within Navajo thought, the significance is far greater. To wear the hide of a predator is taboo, a violation of cultural law. Coyotes, wolves, and bears are powerful beings, each carrying spiritual weight. Their skins are not garments but boundaries. To put one on is to cross into the animal's essence, to take on attributes that do not belong to humans. This is why the hide is the defining mark of the Skinwalker. It is not simply clothing, it is a declaration that the wearer has forsaken humanity to merge with something wild and dangerous. Accounts describe skinwalkers storing these hides in secret, hidden in caves, abandoned hogans, or buried far from prying eyes. They are treated with ritual, infused with chants and substances that bind them to the witch. Once worn, the hide enables transformation, not just in form, but in spirit. Witnesses often describe the resulting creature as grotesque, its movements jerky, its proportions wrong, as though the human body struggles to accommodate the shape it has forced upon itself. The hide is both the source of power and the mark of corruption, the visible sign that the person wearing it has abandoned all ties to balance. The second tool, more feared than the hides, is the witch's powder. This substance is said to be made from ground human bones, often those of infants or children, combined with herbs and other elements known only to the witch. The powder is blown into a victim's face, or left where it can be touched, inhaled, or consumed. Its effects are devastating. Victims waste away, struck by illness that no ordinary medicine can cure. They experience nightmares, hallucinations, and a growing sense of dread until their bodies fail. To speak of the powder is to speak of the most profound desecration, for it requires the disturbance of the dead, the grinding of bones, the transformation of what should be respected into a weapon. Among the Diné, death itself is a source of spiritual danger. To disturb the dead is to invite corruption. The Skinwalker does not merely disturb, it desecrates, turning the most sacred taboo into the foundation of its power. Stories of the powder often accompany accounts of unexplained sickness. Families describe a healthy person suddenly falling ill, wasting away with no visible cause. When traditional healing ceremonies fail, suspicion turns toward witchcraft. If the illness follows a confrontation, a dispute, or a sighting of strange tracks near the home, the conclusion is clear. A skinwalker has struck. The powder, invisible and deadly, becomes the explanation for suffering that cannot be otherwise understood. The third category of tools involves the bones themselves. Skinwalkers are said to carry fragments of human skeletons, using them as charms or weapons. Some accounts speak of bone whistles that call spirits, of femurs sharpened into tools, of skull fragments worn as amulets. These objects serve both practical and symbolic purposes. They are reminders of death, tokens of the corruption that sustains the witch, and instruments through which their power flows. To carry such a bone is to carry a piece of desecration, a sign that the witch has abandoned all respect for the dead. Beyond these physical objects lie the rituals themselves. Skinwalkers are said to perform ceremonies that mirror sacred practices but in twisted form. Where a healer might sing a chant to restore balance, a skinwalker sings its opposite to disrupt it. Where sand paintings might be made to heal, they are made to curse. Where herbs might be used to cure, they are poisoned, inverted, corrupted.
Some accounts describe skinwalkers gathering in secret groups, performing rituals together, strengthening one another's power through collective desecration. These gatherings, whispered of but rarely witnessed, are said to take place in caves, canyons, or remote mesas, far from the eyes of the community. Those who claim to have stumbled upon such meetings describe scenes of horror, naked figures wearing animal skins, chanting in distorted tones, performing acts that invert every sacred law. Fires burning with unnatural light, bones scattered across the ground, laughter echoing in the night. Whether literal or symbolic, these descriptions convey the same truth. Skinwalker rituals are the dark mirror of sacred ceremonies, perversions of the very practices meant to sustain harmony. Among the most feared of these rituals is the act of transformation itself. To become a skinwalker requires not only the wearing of the hide but the chanting of forbidden songs, the consumption of substances considered unclean, the deliberate breaking of taboos. Some accounts speak of initiates eating human flesh as part of their initiation, a final act of corruption that severs them forever from humanity. Whether this is literal or metaphorical, the meaning is clear. The skinwalker embraces violation as a way of life, proving through action that nothing is sacred, nothing is beyond desecration. The tools of the skinwalker are not only external, their bodies themselves become instruments of terror.
Their eyes are said to glow with an unnatural light, their voices to shift between human and animal tones, their hands to twist into claws. These features are not always visible in daylight, when the skinwalker may appear as an ordinary person. But at night, under the influence of their hides and rituals, the corruption becomes visible. The body itself is marked as a tool, reshaped into something grotesque, a living testament to the path they have chosen. The danger of these tools extends beyond the skinwalker who wields them. To touch a hide, a bone, or a powder without protection is to risk corruption. Stories tell of people who stumbled upon caches of witchcraft materials and soon fell ill, plagued by nightmares and misfortune, until they sought ceremonial cleansing. This is why the discovery of such items in someone's possession is taken as undeniable proof of witchcraft. They are not objects that can be explained away or dismissed. They are too dangerous, too corrupted to be handled by anyone except the witch who made them. Anthropologists who studied Navajo culture in the 20th century often reported being warned away from certain subjects. Informants would share stories of healing ceremonies, of creation myths, of sacred songs. But when the subject of skinwalkers arose, the tone changed. Voices dropped. Conversations ended. When pressed, some would describe objects, powders, bones, skins, but always in fragments, never in detail.
The warning was always the same. To speak too much was to invite danger. The silence itself became a kind of testimony, proof that the tools and rituals of skinwalkers were not stories to be told lightly. The role of these tools highlights the central truth of the skinwalker legend. Their power is not random. It is constructed, sustained, and manifested through objects and rituals. Every hide worn, every bone ground into powder, every inverted chant is a deliberate act of corruption. These are not monsters born by accident. They are monsters made by choice, and every tool they carry is a reminder of that choice. For those who live in the shadow of this legend, the fear is not only of the being itself, but of the things it leaves behind. A scrap of hide found in the desert, a strange powder scattered near a doorway, a bone left in the ashes of a fire. Any of these could be a sign. Any of these could mean that a skinwalker has passed nearby, that its attention has fallen on a family, that danger is near. The tools carry terror because they make the presence of the skinwalker tangible. They are the proof that what was whispered is real. Yet for all their power, these tools also reveal something else. The skinwalker is not invincible. Its abilities depend on objects, on rituals, on secrecy. Without its hides, without its powders, without its bones, it is just a person, corrupted, dangerous, but mortal. This dependency is why secrecy is so fiercely guarded, why the skinwalker lives in silence and fear of exposure. To know its tools is to know its weakness. To discover its hide is to hold its power. To reveal its identity is to strip away its strength. This is why so much effort is spent on concealment, why stories of skinwalkers are told only in whispers, and why even today many refuse to speak their name. The tools of the skinwalker explain how their powers are sustained, how corruption is made visible, how terror is given form. But these tools also point to the reason why the legend is shrouded in silence. To speak of them is to risk drawing their attention, to risk breaking the fragile boundary between safety and danger. To understand the skinwalker fully, one must understand not only the tools they use, but the secrecy that surrounds them, the cultural silence that protects both the people and the stories from forces too dangerous to name. Silence has always been one of the strongest protections in Navajo life when it comes to witchcraft. The skinwalker may rely on hides, powders, and rituals, but the community has its own defense, and it is not a weapon in the usual sense. It is the refusal to speak. To outsiders, this silence often appears puzzling, even frustrating. Researchers arrive eager to collect stories, only to find informants clamming up, cutting conversations short, or changing the subject without explanation. Yet within the Navajo worldview, silence is not avoidance. It is survival. Words are never empty. They carry weight. They create presence. They draw attention. To name a thing is to invite it, and when the subject is the skinwalker, attention is the last thing anyone wants. The fear of speaking the name comes from the belief that skinwalkers are always listening. They are not distant myths but living threats, watching and waiting for signs of weakness. To talk about them openly is to signal that you are thinking about them, and thought itself is a kind of connection. By naming them, by discussing their powers, you open yourself to their gaze. The silence, then, is a shield, a way of closing that door, of keeping them at a distance. This is why so many conversations about skinwalkers end abruptly. People are not being evasive. They are protecting themselves and their families. The silence extends into daily life. Traditional families avoid wearing predator skins, not only because it is taboo, but because it risks suspicion. Children are warned not to whistle at night, for whistling is said to call spirits, and the skinwalker might answer. People avoid traveling alone after dark, staying close to the safety of home and firelight. Even casual conversation is shaped by the unspoken rule: do not invite danger with careless words. These practices are not superstition in the dismissive sense. They are survival strategies, ways of navigating a world where certain forces are always near, waiting for a crack to enter. For anthropologists and outsiders who documented Navajo life in the 20th century, this silence was a constant frustration. They found that while people were often willing to share stories of creation, healing, and ceremony, they grew hesitant when the subject turned to witchcraft. At best, they shared fragments, mentions of hides, powders, curses, but never the full picture. Some outright refused to answer, warning that speaking too much could bring harm. One researcher wrote that his informant stopped the conversation, stared at the ground, and whispered that he could not continue because they might hear. The refusal itself became a kind of testimony. The skinwalker was too real, too dangerous to be spoken of casually. The fear of speaking also creates an atmosphere of suspicion. Because witchcraft is secret, anyone could be suspected.
A sudden illness, a string of misfortunes, an unexplained noise at night, all of these could be signs that a skinwalker is near. But with silence as the rule, accusations are rarely made openly. To accuse is to risk retaliation, to risk drawing the witch's gaze. This tension makes the legend all the more powerful. It thrives in the space between what is seen and what is spoken, between the tracks in the dirt and the silence in the home. The taboo of naming is not unique to the Navajo. Across cultures, the most feared beings are often those that cannot be spoken of. In European folklore, the devil was referred to as the adversary or the enemy, his true name avoided. In many traditions, spirits are called by euphemisms, their real names left unspoken to prevent drawing them near. The Navajo practice of avoiding the word skinwalker fits into this global pattern. What makes it distinct is how deeply it shapes behavior, not only in ceremonies but in everyday life. The silence is not ritualized once a year. It is lived daily, an unspoken rule that everyone understands without needing to explain. This secrecy has another effect. It gives the legend a sense of mystery that fuels its power outside the community. Outsiders hear fragments, half-remembered warnings, vague references to witches in hides. The gaps in knowledge make the skinwalker seem even more terrifying, for what is not said becomes larger in the imagination than what is described. The silence, meant as protection, has unintentionally turned the skinwalker into one of the most compelling figures of American folklore. Yet for those who live with it, there is nothing entertaining about it. The silence is not meant to intrigue, it is meant to keep danger at bay. Some accounts suggest that skinwalkers themselves exploit this silence. Because people are afraid to speak, witches can move more freely, confident that suspicion will remain unspoken. The fear of naming becomes a tool for them, a way of maintaining secrecy. This is why some stories emphasize the importance of unmasking. To know a skinwalker's true identity is to strip away its protection, to make it vulnerable. But doing so requires breaking the silence, risking the dangers that come with speaking too much. The paradox is clear. Silence protects, but silence also hides. The fear of speaking is reinforced by the belief that skinwalkers are not only listening, but capable of direct retaliation. If a person talks about them openly, especially in detail, they may become a target. Illness, nightmares, or strange encounters may follow. Whether this is coincidence, psychological suggestion, or something more is irrelevant to those who live with the fear. The pattern is real, and the silence is the safest course. Even among those who are willing to share stories with outsiders, there is often a sense of unease afterward, as though they have taken a risk that cannot be undone. This silence extends beyond individuals into entire communities. Public discussions of skinwalkers are rare, and when they occur, they are often marked by tension. The stories circulate instead in private, within families, in moments of warning, in whispers around the fire. A parent might tell a child not to wander far at night, adding only that there are things out there better left alone. A healer might warn a patient to avoid certain places without explaining why. The absence of explanation is itself an explanation. Everyone knows what is meant, even if the word is never spoken. For those outside the tradition, this can be difficult to understand. Silence feels like absence, like a refusal to share. But within the Navajo worldview, silence is presence.
It is the act of acknowledging danger without feeding it. It is the recognition that some knowledge carries risk, that some names are not meant to be spoken. In this sense, silence is not emptiness, but strength. It is the community's defense against forces that thrive on attention. The guardians of secrecy are not only individuals, but the culture itself. The refusal to speak is a collective act, sustained across generations, passed from elders to children, reinforced by custom and experience. This is why the Skinwalker legend has survived so powerfully. It is not just the stories that keep it alive, but the silence around them. The gaps, the absences, the things not said. These are as much a part of the legend as the stories themselves. The Skinwalker exists in the space between words, in the hesitation, in the glance away, in the sudden end of a conversation. Yet silence, powerful as it is, cannot erase the truth. The Skinwalker remains, whispered about, encountered, feared. The refusal to speak may shield people from danger, but it also ensures that the legend never dies. It lingers in the imagination, in the desert night, in the tracks that change from paw to foot, in the voices that call from the dark. And it leads to the next question. If so much is sacrificed to become a Skinwalker, if secrecy and silence surround them so tightly, what is the cost of such power? What must they give up, and what do they lose when they walk this forbidden path? The silence that surrounds Skinwalkers exists not only because of fear, but also because of what their existence represents. To those who follow the sacred path of balance, every choice is weighed in relation to community, family, and the harmony of the world. To become a Skinwalker is to reject all of that. It is not a gift freely given or a fate imposed from outside. It is a bargain, and like all bargains with darkness, it demands a price. That price is not measured only in the blood spilled during initiation or in the hides worn in transformation, but in the very fabric of the witch's life. To gain power, the Skinwalker must sacrifice everything that once made them human. The first sacrifice is kinship. Among the DNA, kinship is the foundation of existence. Family ties extend outward, shaping how one relates to every person, every clan, every being in the world. It is through kinship that identity is formed, that balance is maintained. A Skinwalker severs this connection the moment they commit the ultimate betrayal, the killing of a sibling, a relative, or another close kin. This act is not only the initiation into witchcraft, but the breaking of the most sacred bond. By shedding the blood of family, the witch announces that kinship no longer binds them, that they will live outside the circle of harmony. From that moment forward, they are alone, sustained only by secrecy and fear. The second sacrifice is humanity itself. To wear the skin of an animal is not simply to disguise oneself, but to blur the boundary between human and beast. Every transformation pulls the witch further from the human world. Witnesses describe Skinwalkers moving in jerks, their bodies twisting as though bones are breaking, their faces caught between human and animal features. This grotesque in-betweenness reflects the deeper truth. The Skinwalker no longer belongs fully to either world. They are human only in appearance, animal only in fragments. Their essence is corruption, a body and spirit reshaped by the choices they have made. The power they gain is undeniable, but the cost is their very identity. They are no longer what they were. The third sacrifice is community. In Navajo life, the community is more than a group of people. It is the living structure of balance, sustained through ceremonies, rituals, and shared responsibilities. Healers restore harmony not only to individuals, but to the community as a whole. The Skinwalker inverts this role, using sacred knowledge to harm rather than heal. By doing so, they place themselves outside the circle. They become a threat to everyone, and in return, they are cut off. The community may whisper about them, may suspect their presence, but it will never embrace them again. Their power depends on isolation. on living at the edges, in secrecy and shadow. This exile is part of the price. The fourth sacrifice is trust. Skinwalkers live in constant fear of exposure. Their identity is their greatest weakness, for to know their name is to strip away their power. This means they cannot form close bonds, cannot allow themselves to be fully known. Even allies within witchcraft are temporary, bound only by mutual secrecy and fear. Trust, the glue that holds families and communities together, becomes impossible. Every relationship is marked by suspicion. Every interaction is guarded. To maintain their power, skinwalkers must sacrifice the very possibility of connection. The fifth sacrifice is peace. Accounts suggest that skinwalkers are never free from the consequences of their choices. They are haunted by the spirits of those they have killed, pursued by the corruption they carry. Their lives are marked by paranoia, by the constant need to guard their identity, by the knowledge that they are hated and feared by everyone around them. Some stories describe skinwalkers growing increasingly twisted over time, their bodies deforming, their minds consumed by bitterness. Power sustains them, but it offers no rest. Theirs is a life of endless tension, of looking over their shoulder, of knowing that death will come violently when it comes. The sixth sacrifice is morality. To become a skinwalker is to embrace desecration. Rituals that involve bones, powders, hides, and curses are not accidents but deliberate acts of violation. Every ceremony is an inversion, every act a rejection of the sacred. Over time, this corruption consumes the witch, eroding any sense of right or wrong. What remains is hunger for power, for control, for domination. The skinwalker lives only for themselves, their humanity sacrificed to the endless pursuit of strength. Taken together, these sacrifices reveal why skinwalkers inspire such fear. They are not outsiders cursed by chance. They are insiders who have chosen betrayal, who have given up family, community, humanity, and morality for the sake of power. This is what makes them so terrifying. They are not bound by the same rules as everyone else. They have nothing left to lose. Their very existence is proof of what happens when the sacred is abandoned, when harmony is forsaken for selfish gain. The sacrifices also explain why the legend has endured so strongly. The skinwalker is not just a figure of horror, but a cautionary tale. They embody the consequences of betrayal, the dangers of abandoning kinship and balance. To tell their story is to remind each generation of what must never be done, of the lines that must never be crossed. The fear they inspire is not only of the creature in the night, but of the path that leads there, the choices that transform a human into a monster. Yet there is an irony in this sacrifice. For all their power, skinwalkers remain dependent. Their hides, their powders, their rituals, all are tools they must maintain. Their secrecy must never be broken. Their fear of exposure never ends. In gaining speed, strength, and terror, they lose freedom, trust, and peace. They are powerful, but never safe, feared, but never secure. The legend portrays them as invincible, yet their lives are marked by fragility, by the constant risk of discovery. Their sacrifice is not only moral, but practical. They trade the safety of community for the uncertainty of secrecy, the harmony of kinship for the precariousness of fear. This duality, power gained at the cost of everything else, is what makes the skinwalker such a potent symbol. They remind people not only of what is possible when taboos are broken, but of what is lost in the process. They are the shadow of choice, the embodiment of the warning that some paths, once taken, can never be undone. As the legend spread beyond Navajo lands, this complexity was often lost. Outsiders heard only fragments, the hides, the transformations, the curses, and reimagined the skinwalker as a kind of cryptid, a monster of the desert. But within the original context, the story was always more than that. It was about sacrifice, about the cost of power, about the danger of choices that cannot be reversed. To understand the Skinwalker is to understand that horror lies not only in what they can do, but in what they have given up to become what they are. And it is here that the legend begins to move beyond its original boundaries. From whispers around hogans and warnings in families, the story of the Skinwalker began to enter the wider American imagination. Travelers, settlers, and researchers carried fragments of it outward, blending it into the larger tapestry of frontier folklore. In this way, the figure of the Skinwalker crossed another line, moving from the sacred and forbidden into the shared landscape of American memory, where its terror would take on new forms. The Skinwalker legend began as something tightly bound to Navajo life, a story of witchcraft, taboo, and betrayal that was never meant for the ears of outsiders. For centuries it lived in silence, spoken only in whispers, carried only within families and ceremonies when warnings had to be given. But stories have a way of traveling, and the American frontier was a place where rumors, tales, and fragments of knowledge moved as swiftly as traders and settlers themselves. By the late 19th century, as outsiders pushed deeper into the Southwest, the Skinwalker began to slip from the guarded silence of the DNA into the wider stream of American memory. It did not happen all at once. It came in fragments, in overheard warnings, in glimpses of something strange on the desert horizon. Piece by piece, the image of the Skinwalker began to take on a new life far beyond its original meaning. Traders were among the first to carry the legend outward. These men, moving between Navajo settlements and frontier outposts, often picked up stories from the people they worked with. They heard the caution not to wear coyote hides, the whispers about figures that ran faster than any man, the accounts of livestock found mutilated in inexplicable ways. But the traders rarely understood the cultural weight of these stories. To them, they were curiosities, fragments of Indian superstition that could be repeated around a fire for entertainment. Stripped of their sacred context, the Skinwalker became something else, not the embodiment of betrayal and desecration, but a desert monster, a thrilling tale to unsettle listeners at night. Anthropologists followed, some more respectful than others. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, researchers working in the Southwest often pressed Navajo informants for details of witchcraft. They recorded stories of hides, powders, transformations, and curses, though almost always in fragments. The reluctance of the informants frustrated them, but what little they gathered was enough to feed the imaginations of readers far beyond the Navajo nation. Academic journals and ethnographic collections carried the word outward, turning what had once been a forbidden subject into an object of curiosity for outsiders. Even in these records, the fear was palpable. Informants often stopped mid-story, refusing to say more, their words trailing into silence. To readers, that silence only deepened the mystery, suggesting a danger too great to name. As these fragments spread, the Skinwalker began to merge with the larger mythology of the frontier. The American West was already a place filled with legends, tales of ghost lights, haunted canyons, phantom riders, and strange creatures stalking the desert. The Skinwalker fit neatly into this landscape, another figure of terror lurking in the vast spaces of the Southwest. Cowboys told stories of wolves that walked upright, of coyotes that laughed in human voices, of figures running across the mesas in the moonlight. Settlers repeated rumors of Navajo witches who could transform into animals, blending them with their own inherited tales of European werewolves and witches. In this way, the Skinwalker crossed a cultural boundary, becoming not only a Navajo figure, but an American one. The blending of traditions often distorted the original meaning. In Navajo thought, the Skinwalker was never simply a beast. It was always a human who had chosen corruption, who had broken the most sacred laws. But in frontier retellings, this distinction was often lost. Outsiders imagined the Skinwalker as a creature in its own right, a desert werewolf, a cryptid haunting lonely trails. Newspapers occasionally published sensational accounts of Indian witches or shapeshifters terrorizing settlements, their words more focused on shock value than cultural accuracy. Each retelling pushed the figure further from its origins, transforming it into a character in the wider American theater of the strange. By the mid-20th century, the Skinwalker had become part of the growing fascination with the supernatural in popular culture. Ghost stories, pulp magazines, and eventually radio programs picked up fragments of the legend. They presented it alongside tales of Bigfoot, haunted mines, and UFO sightings, weaving it into the larger fabric of American folklore. In these retellings, the Skinwalker became both more familiar and more alien. Familiar because it echoed the European stories of werewolves and witches. Alien because it was tied to the desert, to native traditions, to the sense of a mysterious and half-understood world just beyond the edge of modern life. This transformation says as much about America as it does about the legend itself. The frontier was always a place where cultures collided, where stories were exchanged and reshaped. For settlers, the Southwest was a harsh and alien land filled with dangers they could not explain. The Skinwalker, in its distorted form, became a symbol of that fear, a reminder that the desert was not empty but inhabited by powers they did not understand. At the same time, it became a convenient way to exoticize native culture, to turn deeply sacred beliefs into thrilling entertainment. The Skinwalker became a character in dime novels, campfire tales, and eventually horror films, far removed from its original meaning. Yet, even as outsiders distorted the legend, the fear within Navajo communities never diminished. For the Diné, the Skinwalker remained what it had always been, the most feared witch, the embodiment of betrayal and desecration. Outsider retellings might turn it into a monster of the frontier, but within Navajo life, the silence and the warnings persisted. Families still whispered of figures outside the hogan at night. Elders still warned children not to speak the name. The legend lived on in two parallel forms: the distorted version carried into American memory, and the original guarded version sustained within the community. The distortion also fueled new interpretations. As UFO sightings and paranormal phenomena grew in popularity in the mid-20th century, some began linking Skinwalker stories with reports of glowing lights, strange creatures, and unexplained events. The Skinwalker began to be associated not only with witchcraft, but with a broader sense of the supernatural, merging with the expanding landscape of American mystery. This blending reached its peak in the late 20th century with one specific location, a patch of land in Utah that came to be known as Skinwalker Ranch. Here, reports of mutilated cattle, glowing orbs, and terrifying figures pushed the legend into the national spotlight. The name itself, Skinwalker Ranch, ensured that the Navajo witch of legend would forever be tied to modern paranormal culture. The irony is that the Skinwalker became more famous outside Navajo country than within it. Within the community, people still avoided the name, still refused to speak in detail. But beyond, the Skinwalker was spoken of freely, dissected on radio shows, debated in books, turned into the subject of documentaries and horror films. Outsiders embraced the very thing the Diné avoided: open conversation, speculation, entertainment. In doing so, they stripped the Skinwalker of its context but amplified its presence, turning it into one of the most recognizable figures of American folklore. The journey from folklore to frontier memory reflects a larger pattern in American history, where native traditions are often taken, reshaped, and reimagined by outsiders. Yet the Skinwalker is unusual in that it resists full domestication. Even stripped of context, even turned into a cryptid or horror trope, it retains a sense of dread that goes deeper than other legends. Something about the figure, the shifting forms, the glowing eyes, the mimicry of voices, lingers in the imagination in a way that other monsters do not. Perhaps this is because the legend was never meant for outsiders in the first place. It carries with it the weight of secrecy, of taboos, of stories whispered only in private. That weight survives even when the details are distorted. Today, when people speak of skinwalkers in America at large, they are often referring to encounters far removed from the original context, sightings on highways, ranches, or lonely stretches of desert. Yet, behind every retelling lies the deeper truth, the original figure that inspired them all, the Navajo witch who chose the forbidden path, who sacrificed kinship and humanity for power, who moves in hides beneath the desert moon. No amount of distortion can erase that foundation. It remains at the core of the legend, the reason why the Skinwalker endures not only as a story, but as a presence. The spread of the Skinwalker into American memory set the stage for its most famous modern manifestation. The ranch in Utah, where strange events drew investigators, journalists, and thrill-seekers, and where the Navajo witch of legend was merged with the larger world of UFOs, cattle mutilations, and government research. To understand how the Skinwalker became not only a legend but a headline, we must turn to that land, to the stories that have made it infamous, and to the way they reshaped the witch of the desert into a global figure of fear. The Skinwalker may have lived in silence for centuries, a whispered terror within Navajo communities, but its leap into modern fame came from one piece of land. A ranch in northeastern Utah, an otherwise unremarkable spread of desert and pasture, became the focal point for some of the strangest and most unsettling reports in American paranormal history. Its name alone carried the weight of centuries: Skinwalker Ranch. To many, this was the place where myth and modernity collided, where the ancient terror of Navajo witchcraft merged with cattle mutilations, glowing lights, UFO sightings, and government research. It became the stage on which the Skinwalker was no longer a private legend, but a national obsession. The land itself had long been marked as unusual. Stories circulated among locals of strange lights in the sky, unexplained animal deaths, and eerie presences in the night. Native traditions had long regarded the area with caution, describing it as a place where dangerous forces were concentrated. When settlers moved in, they found themselves confronting the same unease. Livestock disappeared, dogs barked at nothing, shadows moved across the fields without source. Yet the stories remained localized until the mid-1990s, when a ranching family purchased the property and quickly found themselves living in a nightmare. The family's experiences read like a catalogue of the paranormal. Soon after moving in, they reported seeing enormous wolves near their livestock. Not ordinary wolves, but creatures far larger than any natural animal, with eyes that glowed unnaturally in the dark. In one incident, a wolf approached calmly, seemingly tame, only to suddenly lunge and attack a calf. The rancher fired multiple rounds into the animal at point-blank range, but the bullets had no effect. The creature walked away, leaving no blood trail, its body impervious to the weapons that should have killed it. Encounters like this convinced the family that they were dealing with something far beyond natural predators. Their livestock suffered in ways that defied explanation. Cattle were found mutilated, their bodies surgically cut with precision no predator could accomplish. Organs were removed without disturbance to surrounding tissue. Blood was drained without a trace left behind, and in some cases the animals were left intact except for a single, inexplicable injury. These mutilations mirrored cases reported across the American West for decades, but on the ranch they became routine, almost expected. For a family whose livelihood depended on their herd, the losses were devastating, both economically and psychologically.
Strange lights became another constant. Orbs of glowing blue and orange were seen floating across the fields, darting through the trees, and even entering buildings. Some orbs appeared intelligent, responding to observers moving closer or darting away when pursued.
Witnesses described feelings of dread when in their presence, as though the lights carried not only physical danger, but an oppressive psychological weight. In one incident, an orb hovered near the family's dogs. The animals barked furiously and chased it, only for the orb to lead them into the brush. Minutes later, the ranchers heard terrified yelps. When they reached the spot, they found only scorched ground and the charred remains of their dogs. The orb had lured them to their deaths. Physical manifestations inside the home added another layer of terror. The family reported hearing footsteps on the roof, voices whispering from empty rooms, and doors slamming without cause. Objects disappeared and reappeared in strange places. Shadows moved across the walls with no source of light. The cumulative effect was overwhelming. This was not one isolated phenomenon, but a convergence of many. Creatures, lights, poltergeist activity, mutilations, all centered on a single piece of land. The family eventually abandoned the ranch, unable to endure the relentless strangeness, but their story had already attracted attention. In 1996, the property was purchased by Robert Bigelow, a wealthy businessman with a fascination for the paranormal. Bigelow established the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, and staffed the ranch with researchers, hoping to document and understand the phenomena. For years, the ranch became the site of scientific investigation unlike any other, blending academic study with elements of ghost hunting and cryptozoology. The results were both compelling and inconclusive. Researchers documented glowing lights, strange magnetic readings, and unexplained animal deaths, but the phenomena seemed to resist systematic study. Cameras malfunctioned, equipment was destroyed, and attempts to capture evidence often ended in frustration. Witnesses reported seeing creatures with glowing eyes peering from trees, enormous animals that vanished when pursued, and dark shapes that defied description. Yet hard proof remained elusive. The ranch became known not for answers, but for questions, a place where the paranormal played with those who tried to measure it. The connection to the Skinwalker legend became cemented during this time. Locals had long associated the land with dangerous beings, and Navajo stories of witches who could transform into animals provided a cultural framework for the strange encounters. The name Skinwalker Ranch stuck, ensuring that the Navajo witch of legend would forever be tied to the modern phenomena. The irony is that the Skinwalker itself, in its original form, was only one part of a much larger range of events, yet the name carried power, linking ancient fear with modern mystery in a way that no other label could. As word of the ranch spread, it attracted media attention. Articles, documentaries, and eventually television series brought the story to a global audience. The Skinwalker became a household name, no longer confined to whispers in Navajo country, but broadcast on screens around the world. To some, it was proof of supernatural forces, a sign that science could not explain everything. To others, it was entertainment, a compelling story of mystery and fear. Either way, the legend had crossed another boundary, moving from local folklore to global phenomenon. Skeptics pointed out that much of the evidence was anecdotal, that the lack of hard proof suggested exaggeration or fabrication. But even skeptics acknowledged the persistence of the reports. Too many witnesses, too many experiences, too much consistency across decades made outright dismissal difficult. Whether the phenomena were psychological, natural but misunderstood, or truly supernatural, remained debated. What mattered was that the ranch had become a symbol, a place where the unknown gathered, a stage for the clash between belief and doubt. For those who trace the legend back to its roots, the use of the name Skinwalker to describe the ranch carries its own weight.
It ties modern encounters to ancient fears, blending cattle mutilations with Navajo witchcraft, UFOs with animal transformations. In doing so, it creates a hybrid legend, one that is both traditional and modern, sacred and sensational, and
The Skinwalker of Navajo thought was never about glowing orbs or government investigations. It was about betrayal, desecration, and the corruption of sacred knowledge. But in the imagination of the wider world, these layers merged, creating a figure that could stand as both witch and cryptid, both cultural taboo and pop culture monster. The cursed land of Skinwalker Ranch remains one of the most famous paranormal sites in America, its name inseparable from the legend. But to understand the Skinwalker fully, one must step back from the sensational headlines and remember the figure at its heart. The witch in hides, the human who chose corruption, the being that lives in the silence of Navajo night. And from here, the story turns inward once again, to the paradox of the witch itself, a figure that can heal or harm, protect or destroy, embodying the dual nature of power in every culture. Every account of the Skinwalker emphasizes corruption, betrayal, and the embrace of destruction. Yet to truly understand why such figures inspire such fear, one must first consider what came before. The witch, in almost every culture, is not an outsider invented for horror alone. They emerge from the same body of knowledge as the healer, the same roots of ceremony and ritual, the same understanding of plants, chants, and spirits that sustain life. The paradox of the witch lies in this shared origin. The healer and the witch draw from the same well, but one uses it to restore balance while the other twists it to destroy. This duality is what makes the witch both fascinating and terrifying. The reminder that power is never neutral and that every tool for healing can be inverted into harm. Among the Dene, the medicine man holds an essential role. He is a keeper of ceremony, one who knows the chants, sand paintings, and rituals needed to restore Hojo, the harmony between people, nature, and the spirit world. When illness strikes, when misfortune disrupts balance, the healer is called to set things right. The work requires deep knowledge, patience, and respect for the sacred. Yet, it is precisely this knowledge that provides the foundation for witchcraft. A witch is not someone ignorant of ceremony. They are someone who knows it intimately and chooses to invert it. Every chant has its opposite, every ritual its shadow. The same skill that heals can curse. The same herbs that protect can poison. This is the paradox. The witch is not born outside the sacred, but from within it, a reflection of what happens when knowledge is twisted. This inversion explains why skinwalkers are feared more than simple predators or spirits. They represent the possibility that even the most trusted knowledge can be turned against the community. The healer is called upon to protect, to restore, to safeguard balance. The skinwalker embodies the opposite, the one who betrays, disrupts, and weaponizes that same knowledge. The closeness between healer and witch makes the betrayal all the more painful. It is not ignorance that creates the skinwalker, but deliberate choice. They are proof that even the sacred can be corrupted, that even the most revered roles can collapse into horror. This dual nature is not unique to the Navajo. Across the world, the figure of the witch is often bound to the healer. In medieval Europe, the village wise woman who knew herbs, charms, and remedies could be revered one year and accused of witchcraft the next. Her knowledge, so essential to survival, also made her dangerous in the eyes of her neighbors. In Africa, the Nganga or healer often walked a thin line between curing illness and cursing enemies, their power viewed with both trust and suspicion. In Polynesia, the kahuna could bless or curse, heal or destroy, depending on how their knowledge was applied. The paradox is universal. Every culture that recognizes sacred power also recognizes its inversion. the shadow that comes when knowledge is turned against harmony. What makes the Navajo skinwalker distinct is the extremity of the betrayal. They are not only witches, but witches who embrace the most forbidden acts: fratricide, desecration of the dead, transformation into beasts. They represent the farthest possible inversion, the point at which humanity itself is sacrificed. Yet even here the paradox remains. To become a skinwalker, one must first know the sacred. Their corruption is possible only because they once stood within the circle of ceremony. They are the shadow cast by the healer's fire. This paradox also explains why the witch is both feared and necessary in the imagination of the community. Without the possibility of corruption, the role of the healer would have no shadow, no counterweight. The existence of the witch defines the importance of the healer, just as the healer's presence highlights the danger of the witch. Together, they form a duality that reflects the larger Navajo worldview of balance. Harmony exists because there is always the possibility of disharmony. The healer restores, the witch disrupts. Each is a reminder of what is at stake in every choice, every ceremony, every relationship. The paradox extends into the figure of the witch as destroyer. The skinwalker is not merely a healer turned wrong, but a force that delights in corruption. They thrive on fear, isolation, and secrecy. Yet even here, their power is inseparable from what was once sacred. Their powders, made from bones, mimic the healer's use of herbs. Their chants, inverted, echo the rhythms of sacred songs. Their transformations parody the sacred animal connections of Navajo spirituality. Every act of desecration is a mirror of a sacred act, a shadow of the ceremony it perverts. This is why skinwalkers horrify. They remind the community that nothing is safe from corruption, that even the holiest practices can be turned into weapons. The paradox of the witch also resonates with broader human psychology. In every society, there is a recognition that the capacity for healing and the capacity for harm exist within the same human being. The doctor can save lives, but can also take them. The leader can protect or exploit. The parent can nurture or abuse. The witch, as an archetype, embodies this dual potential. They are the externalization of humanity's fear of its own shadow, the reminder that the same skills that create can also destroy. The skinwalker, with their origins in healing knowledge and their embrace of betrayal, is the Navajo expression of this universal truth. For outsiders who encounter the skinwalker legend, this paradox is often flattened. The witch becomes only a monster, stripped of the complexity of its role within the culture. Yet for the Diné, the paradox is always present. The witch is not separate from the healer, but born from the same ground. This is why the fear is so deep. It is not fear of the unknown, but fear of the known corrupted. It is fear that those who should protect might betray, that those who should heal might harm. This duality is not merely symbolic. It shapes how communities respond to misfortune. When illness strikes, ceremonies are performed to restore balance, but if healing fails, suspicion may turn toward witchcraft. The line between healer and witch becomes a question of intent. The same chants, the same objects, the same knowledge could be used for either purpose. This uncertainty creates both reverence and fear, respect for those who hold sacred knowledge and suspicion that such power might be misused. The skinwalker is the extreme outcome of that suspicion, the figure who proves that the fear is justified. In modern retellings, this paradox often goes unacknowledged. Popular culture presents the skinwalker as a supernatural beast, a desert cryptid, a figure of horror divorced from its roots. Yet, without the context of healer and witch, the story loses its depth. It becomes only another monster story, stripped of the profound tension that gives it power. To restore that depth, one must return to the paradox, to the recognition that the skinwalker is not an outsider, but a corrupted insider, not a beast, but a human who chose betrayal. not a stranger but someone who once stood within the circle of sacred knowledge. This paradox prepares the ground for understanding the skinwalker within a larger archetype, the shapeshifter. Across cultures, the figure of the one who changes form appears again and again, reflecting humanity's fascination with transformation and fear of its consequences. The skinwalker is part of this larger pattern, a uniquely Navajo expression of a universal archetype. To see them as healer, sorcerer, and destroyer is to place them within a lineage of shapeshifters that stretches across time and cultures, each one embodying humanity's deepest anxieties about identity, power, and corruption. The skinwalker occupies a unique place in Navajo tradition, yet it also belongs to something larger, something that stretches far beyond the desert mesas of the American Southwest. The idea of beings who can change their form, who cross the boundaries between human and animal, has haunted the human imagination for as long as stories have been told. Every culture seems to carry its own version, its own shapeshifter, and in each case the figure serves as both fascination and warning. To understand the skinwalker fully is to see it not only within the Navajo world, but within this broader archetype, to recognize how deeply the fear of transformation runs through human history. In Europe, the werewolf is perhaps the most famous example. Stories of men who turn into wolves under the light of the moon go back centuries, blending pagan traditions, Christian morality tales, and folklore of the wild. The werewolf represents many of the same fears as the skinwalker: the collapse of the line between man and beast, the loss of control, the eruption of violence from within. Yet the European werewolf is often portrayed as cursed, a victim of forces beyond their control, doomed to transform whether they will it or not. The skinwalker differs in one crucial way. They are not cursed, but chosen. Their transformation is not an accident, but an act of will, a declaration of betrayal. Where the werewolf is tragic, the skinwalker is monstrous by choice. Other European traditions carry similar themes. The witch's familiar, often described as a cat, toad, or raven, was believed to be a demon in animal form, or even the witch herself transformed. Tales of witches riding broomsticks echo the idea of bodily transformation, of humans taking unnatural forms to move through the night. The fear was always the same: that the boundary between human and animal, natural and supernatural, could be crossed by those who trafficked with forbidden powers. In Africa, shape-shifting stories are just as pervasive. Among the Asante of West Africa, the Adze is a creature that takes the form of a firefly but can transform into a human sorcerer to drain life from its victims. In other regions, witches are said to transform into hyenas, leopards, or owls to stalk their prey. These beings, like the skinwalker, are not outsiders, but members of the community who choose the path of witchcraft. Their transformations are signs of corruption, of the human will bent toward predation. Here again, the line between healer and witch, protector and predator, defines the archetype. In India, the Nagas, serpent beings who can shift between human and snake forms, embody another kind of transformation. Sometimes they are protectors, guarding treasures or sacred spaces. Other times, they are deceivers, luring humans into danger. Their duality reflects the same paradox found in the witch: power that can heal or harm, protect or destroy. The shapeshifter is always ambiguous, always unpredictable, always capable of blurring boundaries in ways that unsettle the human imagination. In Japan, the kitsune, the fox spirit, is a master of transformation. Foxes are believed to live long lives and grow multiple tails as they gain power, eventually becoming capable of taking human form. Some kitsune are benevolent, serving as messengers of the gods, bringing fortune and protection. Others are tricksters, deceiving humans, leading them astray, or even possessing them. The kitsune embodies the same ambivalence as the skinwalker, the fear that what looks human may not truly be human at all, that trust can be betrayed by the shifting of form. Among the Inuit, stories speak of the Tungait, spirits that can take animal or human shapes, often serving shamans, but sometimes turning against them. In South America, jaguar shamans are believed to shift into their animal counterparts, harnessing their strength and ferocity. In Polynesia, certain chants and rituals allow practitioners to take on the forms of sharks, birds, or lizards, blurring the line between human and animal for both survival and sorcery. Everywhere the theme repeats. The power to cross boundaries, to move between forms, is both feared and desired. What unites all these traditions is the recognition that shape-shifting represents the deepest anxieties about identity. To be human is to live within boundaries of body, of community, of morality. To change form is to violate those boundaries, to step outside the order of the world. The shapeshifter embodies the fear that identity itself is unstable, that what appears human may conceal something else, that the line between self and other is fragile. This is why the archetype appears everywhere. It speaks to something fundamental in the human psyche, the dread of losing oneself, of becoming something other, of being unable to trust the face in front of you. The Skinwalker stands within this archetype but adds its own layers. Unlike many shapeshifters, they are not playful tricksters or tragic victims. They are deliberate violators, humans who choose corruption, who cross boundaries not for survival or whim but for domination and fear. Their power comes not from natural spirits or divine gifts, but from desecration, from betrayal, from acts that sever them forever from balance. This makes them uniquely terrifying. They embody not only the instability of identity, but the corruption of choice, the possibility that anyone could abandon humanity for power. The archetype of the shapeshifter also reveals why Skinwalker stories resonate so strongly with outsiders. Even without understanding the cultural context, people recognize the fear of something that moves between forms, that cannot be trusted, that is never what it seems. The stories of figures running alongside cars, of voices mimicking loved ones, of animals with human eyes, these strike at universal anxieties. They echo the werewolf, the kitsune, the hyena witch, the serpent, the jaguar. They speak to the same primal fear, that the familiar can become the unfamiliar, that the safe can turn dangerous, that identity itself can collapse. Yet there is also fascination. Shapeshifters are not only feared but desired. They represent freedom from the limits of the body, the ability to cross into other forms, to see the world through different eyes. In some cultures, shapeshifting is revered, a gift of shamans and gods. The Navajo distinction between healer and witch makes this paradox sharp. The same knowledge that allows the healer to walk in balance allows the witch to become a skinwalker. Power is always ambivalent, always capable of crossing into shadow. The archetype reflects this duality, showing both the allure and the terror of transformation. For modern audiences, shapeshifters have become central figures in popular culture. From werewolves in horror films to superheroes who change form, the archetype persists, reshaped but never erased. The Skinwalker in this landscape has become a particularly potent symbol. It carries the weight of its Navajo roots while also fitting seamlessly into the global imagination of shapeshifters. This dual existence, local and universal, sacred and popular, ensures its survival as one of the most enduring figures of modern folklore. But the archetype alone cannot explain the full power of the Skinwalker. To understand why they inspire such dread not only in stories but in lived experience, one must look inward, into the human psyche itself. The shapeshifter is not only an external figure but an internal one, a reflection of the shadows within the human mind. The Skinwalker embodies not only cultural fears but personal ones, the darkness we all carry, the potential for corruption within ourselves. To move deeper into the legend is to confront this inner shadow, to see in the Skinwalker a mirror of our own hidden selves. Every culture that speaks of witches and shapeshifters is, at some level, speaking about the human mind. Stories of transformation are not only about what lurks in the wilderness or what stalks the village at night. They are also about what lives inside us, the parts of ourselves that we fear, deny, or try to bury. The Skinwalker, with its grotesque transformations and its deliberate embrace of corruption, is more than just a witch in hides. It is a mirror of the inner shadow, a reflection of the darkness each person carries but rarely wishes to face. To hear a Skinwalker story is to feel fear, not only of an external predator, but of what might be possible within ourselves if the wrong choices are made. In psychology, Carl Jung described the shadow as the repressed aspects of the psyche, the impulses, desires, and traits that a person refuses to acknowledge. These rejected elements do not vanish. They remain, waiting in the dark corners of the mind, emerging in dreams, slips of the tongue, or moments of anger. When we confront the Skinwalker in stories, we confront the embodiment of the shadow. It is the part of humanity that chooses betrayal, desecration, and selfish power, the part that refuses harmony and embraces chaos. The horror lies in recognizing that this figure, no matter how monstrous, was once human, and that the line between humanity and monstrosity is thinner than we like to admit.
The Skinwalker's reliance on mimicry, imitating voices, disguising itself as familiar figures, is an especially striking metaphor for the shadow. The unconscious often appears in disguise, taking on forms that are recognizable but unsettling. In dreams, a loved one might act strangely, speaking with a voice that feels almost wrong. In stories, the Skinwalker calls with the voice of a friend, only for the victim to realize too late that it is a trap. Both experiences carry the same dread, the recognition that what should be safe can conceal danger, that the familiar can become the unfamiliar. This is the essence of the shadow, the intrusion of the hidden self into the everyday. The grotesque nature of Skinwalker transformations reflects another psychological truth. To repress the shadow is to distort it, to push it into unnatural forms. The Skinwalker, caught between human and animal, never fully one or the other, embodies the distortion of a self that has abandoned integration. It is humanity twisted by denial and corruption, a body that reflects the violence of the choices made. When people describe Skinwalkers running with jerky movements, their bodies grotesque and uncanny, they are describing not only the physical horror of transformation, but the psychic horror of disconnection, of being no longer whole, no longer balanced, but warped by its own betrayals. Fear of Skinwalkers is also fear of taboo desires. To kill one's kin, to desecrate the dead, to wield power selfishly, these are impulses that most people repress, but repression does not erase them. The stories of Skinwalkers give form to these impulses, turning them into external monsters that can be feared, fought, and spoken of in whispers. In this way, the legend serves a psychological purpose. It allows people to acknowledge the existence of forbidden desires without directly claiming them, to externalize the shadow rather than confront it within themselves. The Skinwalker becomes the scapegoat for the darker side of humanity, the vessel into which the community pours its fears of betrayal, corruption, and selfishness. Yet, the psychological layer of the legend also explains why the Skinwalker is never truly defeated. No matter how many stories end with witches unmasked, with hides discovered, with powders destroyed, the legend persists. The shadow cannot be killed. It can only be confronted, acknowledged, and integrated. As long as humans repress parts of themselves, as long as we deny our own potential for betrayal and corruption, the Skinwalker will survive as a symbol.
It represents not only an external threat, but an internal one, the part of ourselves that could, under the wrong circumstances, cross the forbidden line. The Skinwalker's association with speed, strength, and cunning also resonates with psychological fears of losing control.
In dreams and myths, monsters often embody overwhelming impulses, anger, lust, envy, that surge beyond our ability to restrain them. The Skinwalker, running faster than a car, tearing through walls, overpowering livestock and humans alike, is a symbol of impulses unleashed, of drives that break free from moral restraint. To fear the Skinwalker is to fear the possibility that our own inner drives might one day overwhelm the fragile structures of morality and community that contain them. The silence surrounding Skinwalker stories also reflects psychological defense. To refuse to speak of something is to repress it, to push it into the unconscious. Yet repression does not erase fear. It strengthens it, allowing it to fester in the dark. The fact that many Navajo refuse to say the name, that they cut off conversations and change subjects, mirrors the way individuals avoid acknowledging their shadow. The more silence surrounds the Skinwalker, the more powerful it becomes, just as the more we deny our shadow, the more it shapes our behavior unconsciously. The legend embodies this dynamic on a cultural scale, showing how entire communities manage fear through silence, and how silence itself ensures the persistence of that fear. The Skinwalker is also a figure of projection. In times of illness, misfortune, or conflict, suspicion often falls on those believed to be witches. This reflects the psychological mechanism of projecting one's own unwanted traits onto others. Instead of acknowledging envy, resentment, or hostility within ourselves, we locate it in another person, accusing them of being the witch, the Skinwalker, the one who carries corruption. This projection serves to protect the self, but also creates division and paranoia within the community. The Skinwalker becomes the vessel for the collective shadow, carrying the weight of fears and impulses that everyone shares, but no one wishes to own. Modern encounters with Skinwalkers, especially those outside Navajo culture, also carry psychological weight. Drivers on lonely highways describe seeing figures running alongside their cars. Ranchers report mutilated livestock with no explanation. Families hear voices outside at night calling their names. These experiences may be real, but they also echo universal psychological fears of being watched, of being hunted, of the familiar becoming strange. The Skinwalker legend provides a framework for these fears, a name to give the shapeless dread that emerges in the dark. Whether the encounters are literal or symbolic, they reveal how deeply the Skinwalker resonates with the human psyche. The Skinwalker's endurance as a legend shows how archetypes function. They persist not because they are real in the material sense, but because they express truths about the human mind. The Skinwalker is the shadow externalized, the inner darkness turned into a figure that can be seen, feared, and named. Or, in the case of the Navajo, deliberately not named. Its horror lies in its familiarity. We fear the Skinwalker not only because of what it does, but because of what it reveals. That the line between human and monster is not a line at all, but a choice, a potential that lives in each of us. When we place the Skinwalker within this psychological frame, we begin to see why the legend is so powerful both within and beyond Navajo culture. It is not only a story of witches in hides, but a mirror of human nature. It forces us to confront questions that are as personal as they are cultural. What would we sacrifice for power? What impulses do we repress? What shadows do we project onto others? And what happens when those shadows break free? The Skinwalker endures because it asks these questions, because it refuses to let us ignore the darker parts of ourselves. This psychological lens also prepares the ground for the next part of the story,
where the skinwalker encounters the gaze of outsiders, colonists, missionaries, and anthropologists who carried their own shadows into the desert. When colonial eyes looked upon the skinwalker, they saw not a reflection of themselves, but a convenient symbol of native superstition, a figure to be distorted, dismissed, or sensationalized. The legend was reshaped, its meaning twisted to fit foreign frameworks. To see how the skinwalker survived in this new context, one must trace how colonial perspectives refracted the figure into something both familiar and alien, turning inner darkness into cultural stereotype. When colonists, missionaries, and anthropologists first encountered stories of Navajo witchcraft, they brought with them their own frameworks, their own shadows, and their own desires for explanation. What they saw in the skinwalker was rarely what the Diné themselves meant. Instead, the figure was filtered through European traditions of witches, demons, and devils, through Christian anxieties about sin, and through anthropological categories that sought to catalogue native life as if it were a curiosity to be dissected. In the process, the skinwalker was twisted into something both familiar and alien, stripped of its original context and reshaped to fit the fears and fantasies of outsiders. Early missionaries were among the first to record fragments of skinwalker stories. For them, the figure was easily folded into the Christian narrative of evil. Witches were already well established in their worldview, tied to the devil, to temptation, to rebellion against God. The Navajo witch became simply another example of humanity's fall into sin, a heathen version of the same devil's servant that haunted European villages. The complex Navajo distinctions between healer and witch, between sacred knowledge and its inversion, were flattened into the binary of good versus evil. Missionaries told their audiences back home of pagan sorcery, of devil worship among the tribes, of dark rituals in the desert that confirmed their belief that native people needed salvation. In doing so, they reduced the skinwalker to a stereotype, a symbol of savagery and superstition rather than a deeply rooted cultural figure. Colonial officials took a different but equally distorting approach. For them, the skinwalker legend was evidence of backwardness, a mark of primitivism that justified policies of control. Belief in witches was seen as proof that the Navajo were uncivilized, in need of education, discipline, and assimilation into Western ways of life. The silence that protected communities from speaking of skinwalkers was interpreted as ignorance, as fear born of childish superstition rather than as a deliberate strategy of survival. Reports of witchcraft trials, when discovered, were compared to Europe's own history of witch hunts, but always with the conclusion that the Navajo were stuck in a stage of development that Europeans had already outgrown. The skinwalker became a colonial tool, a symbol used to justify domination by portraying the people who believed in it as trapped in darkness. Anthropologists, beginning in the late 19th century, brought yet another lens. Fascinated by witchcraft across cultures, they eagerly pressed Navajo informants for stories. Many found themselves frustrated by the silence, by the refusal to speak, by the abrupt endings of conversations. What they managed to gather were fragments, mentions of hides, of powders, of transformations. These fragments were published in journals and reports, stripped of their sacred weight and placed alongside data about rituals, kinship systems, and material culture. The skinwalker became an ethnographic object, something to be catalogued, analyzed, and explained. To readers, the figure seemed exotic, strange, and terrifying, but also distant, another entry in the vast catalogue of primitive beliefs. In the process, much of the legend's meaning was lost. Outsiders did not grasp the significance of kinship, of balance, of hojo, the harmony that defined Navajo life. They saw only the sensational details, the hides, the transformations, the curses. Without context, the skinwalker became little more than a monster story, a desert werewolf for the imagination of outsiders. This stripping away of meaning allowed the legend to travel far, to merge with the wider American fascination with shapeshifters and cryptids. But it also ensured that the Skinwalker was misunderstood, reduced to spectacle rather than respected as a profound cultural warning. Popular culture amplified these distortions. By the mid-20th century, stories of skinwalkers began to appear in pulp magazines, ghost story collections, and eventually films. They were presented as terrifying monsters of the desert, sometimes mixed with elements of UFOs, sometimes with echoes of European werewolves. Rarely were they shown as the human witches they were in Navajo thought. Instead, they became beasts, cryptids, or supernatural forces divorced from their cultural roots. The Skinwalker was now part of the American horror landscape, a figure to frighten audiences who knew little of the culture it came from. Even the association of the Skinwalker with Skinwalker Ranch reflects this colonial distortion. The ranch in Utah was never Navajo land, yet because Navajo legends of witches had been taken up by outsiders and sensationalized, the name was applied to the property. What happened there, glowing orbs, cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, had little to do with the original Skinwalker stories, yet the name stuck, ensuring that in the public imagination, the Skinwalker would forever be tied to phenomena far removed from its cultural context. This is how colonial eyes continue to shape the legend, by detaching it from its roots and reattaching it to whatever fears outsiders wish to project. The effect of these distortions is double-edged. On one hand, they ensured that the Skinwalker became widely known, perhaps the most famous figure of Native American witchcraft. On the other hand, they obscured its original meaning, turning a figure of betrayal and taboo into a pop culture monster. For the Dine, this is not simply a matter of misrepresentation, but of violation. To speak too openly of skinwalkers was always dangerous, yet outsiders have spoken of them freely, publishing their details, spreading their image, and using their name without hesitation. What was once protected by silence has been exposed, twisted, and commodified. And yet, even through these distortions, the Skinwalker has endured. Its essence remains recognizable: the witch who chooses corruption, the human who becomes something monstrous, the figure that embodies betrayal and desecration. Outsiders may misinterpret, sensationalize, or strip away context, but the core fear survives. This resilience speaks to the power of the archetype, but also to the strength of Navajo culture itself. Despite centuries of colonial pressure, despite distortion and misrepresentation, the Skinwalker continues to live in the silence of the community, in the warnings of elders, in the whispered stories told at night. Colonial eyes twisted the story, but they could not erase it. Instead, the legend adapted, surviving in multiple forms, one for outsiders, one for insiders, one for those who sensationalize, and one for those who still whisper. To understand why it survives so powerfully, one must look at how fear, silence, and cultural resilience have protected it across centuries, ensuring that the most feared witch of America still walks in imagination and memory. The Skinwalker legend should not have survived. It lived in silence, in whispers cut short, in the shadows of hogans and the edges of campfires. It was burdened with taboos that forbade open discussion, marked by secrecy that made it dangerous to even speak the name. Colonial officials dismissed it as superstition, missionaries condemned it as devilry, and popular culture twisted it into a monster for entertainment. By all measures, the figure should have faded into obscurity, drowned out by centuries of assimilation, repression, and misrepresentation. And yet, the Skinwalker remains. It endures not only in Navajo life, but in American imagination at large. Its survival is a testament to the power of fear, the strength of silence,
and the resilience of cultural memory. Fear has always been the first and strongest force sustaining the legend. Skinwalker stories are not told for amusement. They are told as warnings, as reminders of what lurks in the dark and what choices must never be made. Fear ensures that even in silence, the legend remains alive. Parents may not explain everything to their children, but the caution in their voices, the restrictions placed on behavior. Don't whistle at night, don't wander alone, don't speak certain names. Carry the weight of the stories without needing to tell them outright. The child grows into an adult who may never have heard the full tale, but who nonetheless knows the rules, the boundaries, the dangers.
Fear transmits the legend across generations, even when words are few. Silence, paradoxically, also ensures survival. To refuse to speak is to acknowledge the danger, to give it space without inviting it closer. The legend is sustained not by constant repetition, but by deliberate gaps, by what is not said. Outsiders often misinterpret this silence as ignorance, assuming that the story is fading. In reality, silence is the story. It is the protective layer that allows the skinwalker to persist without being diminished by overexposure. The fewer the words, the stronger the presence. This is why, even today, many Navajo will refuse to discuss skinwalkers openly, or will cut short conversations when they feel they have gone too far. The silence is not emptiness but power, a way of ensuring that the legend remains potent and untamed. Cultural resilience has carried the legend through even greater pressures. Colonialism sought to erase native traditions through boarding schools, forced conversions, and assimilation programs. Yet the skinwalker survived because it was not taught in schools or written in books. It lived in families, in the private spaces where colonial power could not fully reach. Even when ceremonies were suppressed, even when children were punished for speaking their language, the whispered warnings persisted. The skinwalker remained part of the hidden world of Navajo life, passed down quietly, away from the gaze of those who would have erased it. This resilience is the foundation of its survival. It is a reminder that the deepest stories cannot be silenced by force because they live not in institutions, but in the choices and fears of everyday life. The distortions of outsiders, while often damaging, also inadvertently contributed to the legend's endurance. By sensationalizing the skinwalker, by turning it into a monster for American horror, outsiders ensured that the figure would remain visible, never fully forgotten. For Navajo communities, this visibility was a double-edged sword, an exposure of what should remain hidden, but also a guarantee that the skinwalker would not vanish from memory. The legend split into two versions, the sensationalized skinwalker of popular culture and the guarded skinwalker of Navajo life. Each version fed the other, ensuring that the figure survived in both public and private forms. The adaptability of the legend also explains its resilience. Skinwalkers have been associated with different animals, with shifting forms of witchcraft, with curses and powers that reflect changing fears. In the modern era, they have been linked to UFOs, cattle mutilations, and paranormal investigations. The core remains the same: the witch who chooses corruption, the human who betrays kinship and humanity. But the surrounding details shift with the times. This adaptability ensures that the legend remains relevant, always capable of attaching itself to new fears, new mysteries, new contexts. A figure that can evolve is a figure that survives. The resilience of the skinwalker also reflects the resilience of the Navajo people. Despite centuries of violence, displacement, and cultural suppression, the Diné have preserved their language, their ceremonies, and their stories. The skinwalker is part of that preservation. It is not a celebrated figure, but a feared one, not a hero, but a warning. Its survival is not a sign of pride, but of vigilance. To continue speaking of it, even in whispers, is to maintain continuity with ancestors, to keep alive the cultural memory that shapes Navajo identity. The Skinwalker survives because the people survive, and the people survive because they continue to carry both their sacred and their forbidden stories. In this way, the Skinwalker embodies both fragility and strength. It lives in silence, vulnerable to distortion, yet it persists with a power that defies erasure. It is fragile because it cannot be spoken of freely, yet strong because that very silence protects it. It is feared, hated, and avoided, yet never forgotten. The legend teaches not only about witchcraft, but about resilience itself, about the ways stories endure under pressure, about the capacity of cultures to sustain what matters even when everything else is under attack. The persistence of the Skinwalker also raises a final question. What does it mean today? In a world where skinwalkers appear in movies, on television, in podcasts, and on internet forums, what does the figure still represent within Navajo life? How does it function when it is both a sacred taboo and a pop culture icon, both a guarded warning and a global phenomenon? To answer this requires a reckoning, a final confrontation with the meaning of the Skinwalker, not only as a witch of the desert, but as a mirror for America itself. The Skinwalker endures because it speaks to more than one world at once. For the Diné, it remains what it has always been, the most feared witch, the embodiment of betrayal, the reminder of the path that must never be taken. For outsiders, it has become a monster of the desert, a cryptid, a figure of horror woven into the fabric of American folklore. For psychologists, it is a shadow, the repressed darkness of the human psyche externalized in grotesque form. For popular culture, it is content, a story that can be told again and again in new costumes and settings. Few figures carry this many layers, this much adaptability. Few have survived so many distortions, silences, and retellings. The Skinwalker does because it touches something deep and universal while remaining rooted in a specific cultural soil. At its heart, the Skinwalker is a figure of choice. Unlike curses or accidents, it is not thrust upon someone. To become a Skinwalker is to decide to cross the line, to reject kinship, to desecrate the dead, to embrace corruption for the sake of power. This deliberate betrayal is what makes the figure so terrifying. It reminds us that monstrosity is not something foreign imposed from outside, but something possible within us, waiting in the choices we make. Every Skinwalker story carries this warning. What you fear in the night is not only out there, but also in here, in the human capacity for destruction. The endurance of the Skinwalker also lies in its refusal to be reduced to a single category. It is not just a witch, not just a shapeshifter, not just a monster. It is all of these at once, and that complexity ensures its survival. Simplified monsters fade with time, but complex ones adapt. The Skinwalker can be a desert cryptid for ghost hunters, a symbol of betrayal for cultural insiders, a psychological archetype for scholars, and a horror figure for filmmakers, all without losing its core identity. The multiplicity makes it impossible to erase. Fear sustains it, but not fear alone. Respect sustains it too. Within Navajo life, the refusal to speak openly about Skinwalkers is not just about terror, but about recognition of their power. They are treated seriously, never dismissed as entertainment. This seriousness ensures their endurance. Stories told as jokes fade, stories treated with gravity remain. The Skinwalker persists because every whisper, every silence, every refusal to name reinforces its presence. The adaptability of the legend also reflects the adaptability of the people who carry it. The Diné have survived centuries of upheaval, from forced marches to boarding schools to the pressures of modern life. Their culture endures because it changes when necessary, absorbing what it must, while guarding what cannot be lost. The Skinwalker legend shows this resilience in stark form. It has absorbed distortions, survived misrepresentations, and yet remained recognizable, still feared, still whispered about. It endures because the people endure, and the people endure because they continue to carry the stories that matter, even when those stories are dangerous to tell. The Skinwalker also endures because it resonates with broader American anxieties. The frontier was always a place of fear as well as opportunity. Settlers faced vast landscapes, unfamiliar peoples, and dangers they could not explain. The Skinwalker, twisted through colonial eyes, became a symbol of that fear, a reminder that the land was not empty, but alive with forces they did not understand. In the modern era, as anxiety shifted to technology, government secrecy, and the unknown, the Skinwalker attached itself to new fears: cattle mutilations, glowing orbs, UFOs. The figure's ability to migrate from one context to another, always embodying the newest fear, ensures its survival. In the human psyche, the Skinwalker endures because the shadow endures. We never fully integrate our darker impulses. We repress them, project them, fear them, but they remain. The Skinwalker gives them form, turning the inner shadow into an outer threat. As long as people struggle with betrayal, with selfishness, with the temptation to use knowledge for harm, the Skinwalker will remain relevant. It is not only a cultural story but a psychological truth, a mirror that reflects what we most fear about ourselves. The endurance of the Skinwalker also lies in its refusal to be fully explained. Researchers have tried to document it, skeptics have tried to dismiss it, believers have tried to prove it, yet it resists all attempts at closure. Every story ends with uncertainty: the creature that vanished without a trace, the voice that called in the night but left no body, the illness that could not be explained. This lack of resolution ensures that the legend cannot be dismissed. It lingers, unsettled, always alive in the imagination. The Skinwalker endures because it is never fully seen, never fully captured, never fully known. For those within the Navajo world, the endurance of the Skinwalker is also a lesson in boundaries. The story teaches that some knowledge is not meant to be shared openly, that some names are not meant to be spoken casually, that some dangers must be approached with silence and respect. This cultural stance has protected the legend for centuries. Outsiders may speak freely, but insiders know the cost of careless words. By guarding the story, by refusing to expose it fully, the DNA ensure that the Skinwalker remains potent, never reduced to mere entertainment. The endurance of the legend is tied to the endurance of silence. The Skinwalker also endures because it sits at the crossroads of fascination and dread. People want to hear the stories, even when they know they should not. They want to peer into the darkness, to test the boundary, to feel the thrill of fear.
Yet they also want to step back, to remain safe, to keep the danger at a distance. The Skinwalker provides this balance. It allows people to experience fear without facing it directly, to whisper about danger without inviting it fully. This dynamic of attraction and repulsion ensures that the legend continues to circulate, always spoken of with a mix of excitement and caution. The final reason the Skinwalker endures is simple: it works. As a cultural warning, it reinforces taboos. As a psychological symbol, it externalizes shadows. As a folkloric figure, it captures imaginations. As a pop culture icon, it entertains. No matter what lens one uses, the Skinwalker fulfills a function. It teaches, it terrifies, it fascinates, it adapts. Figures that fulfill this many roles rarely disappear. They survive because they are useful, because they speak to something essential in human experience. And so the Skinwalker continues to walk the desert night in memory, in imagination, in whispered warnings, and in sensational headlines. It endures not because it is safe, but because it is dangerous, not because it is clear, but because it is ambiguous, not because it is simple, but because it is layered. To face the witch is to face betrayal, corruption, the shadow within, the distortion of culture, the resilience of people, and the mystery of the unknown. That is why the Skinwalker endures, because it is never only one thing, because it is always just beyond the firelight, just outside the door, just at the edge of words we dare not say.